Yoo Do-hyun watched his mother, father, and little sister get buried alive by a collapsing dungeon, and it wasn't an accident. A territory lord above them detonated an illegal mining charge to carve out a shortcut to a rival's claim, and the blast fractured the ceiling of the civilian shelter beneath. The supports snapped like twigs. His mother's hand was the last thing he saw before the dust swallowed everything. Our boy survived only because he'd been sent to fetch water from the surface tunnel when the walls came down. He came back to a graveyard of concrete, rebar, and silence. Nobody came to dig. Nobody came to check. The lords above didn't care about a few dozen scavengers in a hole. So Do-hyun spent 3 days clawing through the rubble with his bare hands, pulling out nothing but broken bodies and twisted metal. On the 4th day, he stopped digging. He stopped crying. He just stood there in the ash and the stillness, and something inside him went cold and solid as steel. This wasn't a tragedy to the lords. It was logistics. And he made a decision right then, in the choking dust. He would never be logistics again. Days later, Do-hyun wandered the outer ruins, picking through the bones of dead skyscrapers for anything worth trading. Scavenging was the only life left for people like him now. He spotted a glint of metal half buried under a collapsed highway overpass. Not rusted junk, clean alloy, angled wrong, like it was deliberately placed. He dug around it for an hour, clearing concrete chunks and twisted rebar until he uncovered a circular hatch with no visible handle, just a faint seam glowing blue. That glow wasn't natural. He'd never seen anything powered still working in the ruins before. He pressed his palm flat against the center, and the hatch hissed open with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. Stale air rushed past him, cold and dry and smelling faintly of ozone. A ladder descended into darkness. He didn't hesitate. Whatever was down there, it was better than the surface, where every sunrise meant another chance for some lord's soldiers to shoot you for sport. He climbed down for what felt like 10 minutes, the temperature dropping with every rung. And then his boots hit solid floor. Motion sensor lights flickered on in sequence, revealing a space that made his breath catch. He wasn't in a bunker. He was in a factory. The underground chambers stretched wider than any building he'd ever seen. Rows of silent assembly arms, frozen mid-motion along ceiling tracks. Conveyor belts sat idle, dust-covered but intact. At the far end of the chamber loomed a massive cylindrical structure, pulsing with the same blue light as the hatch. It hummed low and steady, the sound vibrating through his chest. Do-hyun walked toward it slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cathedral-like silence. No corpses, no signs of battle. The place hadn't been abandoned in a panic. It had been shut down deliberately. He reached the central cylinder and found a control panel with a single palm-shaped interface. The blue light pulsed faster. He placed his hand on it, and the core woke up. A concussive wave of energy slammed outward, blue light flooding every corner of the facility as machinery groaned to life. Do-hyun was thrown back against a support pillar, and before he could catch his breath, something sharp stabbed into his temple, not a blade, but information. A data imprint flooded his brain like someone had shoved a library straight into his skull. Schematics, manufacturing protocols, energy flow diagrams, and a core directive stamped into every file. Build. He saw the purpose of this place, a pre-collapse automated construction hub designed to rebuild civilization from the underground up. The surface governments had built it in secret before the dungeons shattered everything, and it had been waiting, dormant, ever since, for someone to reactivate it. For him. When the flood of data receded, Do-hyun pushed himself up on shaky legs and stared at the now-awake assembly arms moving through their calibration sequences. He understood them now. Not intellectually, he understood them the way a bird understands the wind. It was like the knowledge had always been there, just waiting for the right key. He walked to the nearest material intake bay, where salvage conveyors fed into smelting pods. Scrap metal lay scattered around the floor, abandoned mid-load during the facility's shutdown. He dragged a steel girder onto the conveyor with raw effort, his muscles screaming from days without proper food. Then he punched in a design from the imprint, a basic bipedal worker drone. The assembly arms whirred to life. They cut, welded, and assembled faster than any human hands could manage, sparks flying in precise arcs as the frame took shape. In 20 minutes, a 7-foot-tall automaton stood before him, its single optical sensor blinking to life with a soft amber glow. A voice synthesized in his mind, not from the drone, but from something connecting them directly through the facility's network. It spoke only one word, flat and obedient. Designation? He didn't have to think. He named it Unit 01, and Unit 01 took a step forward, metal feet clanking against the catwalk, awaiting its first command. The weight of that moment settled on Do-hyun's shoulders like a second spine. This wasn't just a robot. This was a soldier, A builder, a weapon. He made it lift the next girder onto the conveyor, and Unit 01 moved without hesitation, servos humming, grip steady and precise. That's when the true scope of what he'd found hit him. He didn't need soldiers who got tired. He didn't need allies who could betray him. He didn't need to beg a territory lord for scraps and protection. He could build his own army. An army that never slept, never ate, never questioned. An army that could dig deeper than any dungeon delver dared, far beneath the war-torn surface where no lord could reach. And the best part? Nobody above had any idea this place existed. He gave Unit 01 its second command: clear the debris from the adjacent tunnels and map every passage. The automaton got to work instantly, and Do-hyun sat down hard against a console, his head still swimming from the data upload. He stared at the blue-lit ceiling and thought about his mother's hand in the dust, about the lord who'd triggered the blast and never even knew they existed, about the world above that crushed people like insects and built palaces from their bones. He was done being an insect. This core gave him the one thing every surface lord hoarded and killed for: leverage. Not land, not titles, not monster-taming contracts. Real, industrial leverage, the means to produce power instead of just fighting over its scraps. He stood up, walked to the main control console, and pulled up a holographic map of the surrounding underground stratum. The facility's sensors painted a three-dimensional image of bedrock, aquifers, and hollow spaces stretching for miles. He could expand downward, sideways, wherever the geology allowed. And he knew exactly what he wanted to build. A city, not a bunker, not a hideout, a fully self-sufficient underground metropolis where people could live, eat, and breathe without ever seeing the sun or bowing to a lord. A place no one could collapse with a careless explosion. A place where the rules of the surface stopped at the bedrock. He set a waypoint on the hologram's deepest viable stratum and named the project file with 2 words: New Haven. Unit 01 paused its work, sensor turning toward him as if listening to his thoughts through their bond. He gave it a third command: start digging. And New Haven's first foundation stone was a steel fist punching through solid rock. He watched Unit 01 break ground, the clang of metal on stone echoing through the dark. And for the first time since his family died, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The lords above were still stabbing each other over scorched dirt and crumbling towers, and here he was, one scrap-built drone down, already laying the foundations of an empire 300 meters beneath their feet. Guess what he planned to do next? Unit 01's camera feed flickered to life in the corner of Do-hyun's vision. A ghostly amber overlay projected directly from the core. He sat cross-legged on the cold catwalk, watching through the drone's eye as it climbed out of the hidden hatch into the ruins above. The collapsed dungeon sprawled like an open grave under a gray sky, twisted rebar and shattered concrete stretching for kilometers. Unit 01's servos whirred softly as it scanned the debris field, mapping structural hazards and tagging material caches. A rusted I-beam lay half-buried in ash, still structurally sound according to the drone's density sensors. Do-hyun marked it for retrieval and watched Unit 01 clamp its grippers around the steel, lifting it clear with a single smooth motion. The thing weighed maybe 400 kilos, and the drone handled it like a broomstick. Our boy let out a low whistle. He directed Unit 01 toward a collapsed storefront where the sensors picked up copper wiring, aluminum framing, and an intact circuit breaker box. Everything he needed to expand the assembly line. The drone tore through the debris with mechanical precision, separating usable material from junk faster than any human scavenger crew. Within an hour, it had piled enough salvage to fill the intake bay twice over. Do-hyun's stomach growled loud enough to echo off the catwalk walls, and he realized he hadn't eaten anything since before the activation. He pulled a ration bar from his pack and chewed mechanically, eyes never leaving the feed. Unit 01 detected a faint heat signature beneath a collapsed pharmacy sign and paused, optical sensor narrowing. Do-hyun tensed, but it was just a stray dog, ribs showing through matted fur, sniffing at the same wreckage. The dog locked eyes with the 7-foot metal giant, yelped, and bolted. Guess the wildlife wasn't ready for his new workforce either. He sent Unit 01 on a wider sweep, mapping every alley, sinkhole, and unstable wall in a 2-kilometer radius. The drone's memory banks built a perfect 3-dimensional model of the surface ruins, cross-referenced with the facility's geological scans. Do-hyun could now see exactly where the Lord's patrols moved, where the stable ground ended, and where the hidden cracks in the earth ran deep enough to hide a city. The knowledge settled into his mind like pieces of a puzzle clicking together. He pulled up the holographic blueprint interface and started a new design file. Unit 01 was solid for hauling and basic excavation, but it moved slow and hit like a sledgehammer, great for rock, terrible for precision. He needed something with more torque and a drilling profile that could chew through granite without shaking the ceiling loose. His fingers danced across the projection, pulling component templates from the core's database and snapping them together like digital Legos. The new frame was shorter and wider than Unit 01, built low to the ground with 6 stabilizer legs and a forward-mounted rotary drill assembly. He reinforced the chassis with a double-layer alloy composite, the database called Titan Weave, rated for continuous operation in hard rock mining. The power draw would be higher, but the core had energy to spare now that it was fully online. He named the design file Unit 02, Mole Class Excavator, and sent it to the assembly queue. The fabrication arms hummed as they accepted the blueprint, already beginning to sort the necessary components from the intake bins. While the assembly line warmed up, Do-hyun switched his attention back to Unit 01, which was now 2 kilometers east and descending into a collapsed subway tunnel. The drone's sensors painted the tunnel in wireframe green, revealing a partially intact passage that sloped downward at a 15-degree angle, perfect for a primary access shaft. He directed Unit 01 to clear the fallen concrete blocking the entrance, and the drone got to work with steady, tireless efficiency. Then the proximity alert pinged. A new heat signature, 50 meters ahead of Unit 01's position, small, human-sized, and flickering erratically. Not a dog this time. Do-hyun leaned forward, heart rate spiking as he zoomed the feed. A figure slumped against the tunnel wall, one hand pressed to a wound on their side, the other clutching a short blade slick with dark monster blood. The blood on the blade was still steaming in the cold underground air. Whatever they'd fought, they'd killed it recently. The person's head lifted weakly as Unit 01's optical sensor cast its amber glow across the tunnel. Do-hyun saw a woman's face, sharp-featured and pale, with a fresh gash across her forehead, dripping red into her left eye. She raised her blade at the drone, arm trembling, and spat something he couldn't hear through the visual-only feed. Tough girl, bleeding out in the dark and still ready to stab a 7-foot metal monster. He respected it immediately. He ordered Unit 01 to stop advancing and broadcast a low-frequency non-aggression pulse, a trick he'd found in the core's communication protocols. The woman flinched at the sound, but her blade lowered a fraction. Do-hyun grabbed his medkit and a portable lantern, then sprinted toward the eastern access shaft. He moved through the tunnels faster than he'd ever moved in his life. The facility's layout burned into his brain like a second nervous system. 15 minutes later, he climbed through the broken subway entrance and found Unit 01 standing motionless, amber eye fixed on the wounded woman. She'd stopped trying to threaten the drone and was now just breathing, shallow, ragged breaths that fogged in the cold tunnel air. Her skin was grayish, blood loss turning her complexion the color of wet concrete. Do-hyun approached slowly, lantern raised, hands visible. "Not here to finish the job," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. Her eyes focused on him with effort, flicking from his face to the drone and back. She asked if the robot was his. He said yes. She said it was creepy as hell, then promptly passed out. Our boy caught her before she hit the tunnel floor, already pulling bandages and antiseptic from his kit. The wound on her side was a claw gash, 3 parallel tears through leather armor and into the muscle beneath, probably from a dungeon stalker based on the spacing. He cleaned it fast, applied pressure, and wrapped it tight while Unit 01 stood guard at the tunnel mouth. When she came to 20 minutes later, she was lying on a salvaged cot in the medical bay Do-hyun had jury-rigged from the facility's old first aid station. Her armor was off, her wound was stitched, and her blade was on a table 3 meters out of reach. She noticed all 3 details in the first 5 seconds. Smart girl. Her name, she told him after a long silence, was Seok-jun. She was a freelance scout, hired by some minor territory lord to track unusual energy readings that had been popping up on the surface monitors for the past week. Energy readings that were coming from underneath the ruins, directly underneath where Do-hyun had activated the core. The lord wanted to know if it was a new dungeon forming, something he could claim and exploit before the bigger players noticed. Ji-un had been mapping the signal when a pack of dungeon stalkers ambushed her survey team. She was the only survivor. Do-hyun absorbed this information in silence, his mind racing through the implications. A territory lord already had the signal, not Moon Seok-jun, some smaller player, but the readings were on someone's radar. And if one lord had noticed, the rest wouldn't be far behind. He asked Ji-un what she planned to report. She looked at him for a long moment, then at Unit 01 standing motionless in the corridor, then back at his face. She said she hadn't decided yet. The subtext was clear. She knew he had something big down here, something worth more than whatever the lord was paying her, and she was wounded, unarmed, and completely at his mercy. He could have Unit 01 snap her neck in 2 seconds. She knew that. He knew that. Neither of them said it. Instead, he offered her a deal. She keeps her mouth shut about what she's seen, and he gives her a safe place to recover, plus first claim on any surface intel his network picks up. She gets supplies, protection, and a base that no lord can find. He gets a scout who actually knows the surface politics, the players, and the terrain. Ji-yoon was quiet for a full minute. Then she asked if he had food. He tossed her a ration bar. She caught it left-handed, tore the wrapper with her teeth, and said they had a deal. And just like that, Yoo Do-hyun had his first ally. He left her to rest and headed back to the assembly bay, where Unit 02's frame was already taking shape under the welding arms. The mole-class excavator was uglier than Unit 01, all squat angles and thick plating, with a drill assembly that looked like a prehistoric beetle's mandible. But ugly didn't matter 300 meters underground. What mattered was that it could bore through granite at 4 meters per hour, and stabilize the tunnel behind it with rapid-set polymer spray. He activated Unit 02 at 11 that night, and the new drone's optical sensor glowed a deeper amber than Unit 01's, almost orange. It ran a self-diagnostic, broadcast its ready status directly to his neural link, and awaited orders. He sent it straight down. Unit 2's drill screamed to life, a high-frequency whine that vibrated through the bedrock and into his teeth. And the automaton began carving the first true expansion tunnel of New Haven. The polymer spray hissed as it coated the fresh-cut walls, hardening in seconds into a smooth, structurally sound shell. Do-hyun watched the depth meter climb, meter after meter of solid stone converted into usable passage. By dawn, Unit 02 had carved 50 meters of tunnel and wasn't even breathing hard, because it didn't breathe at all. He was running on caffeine and adrenaline, his body screaming for sleep, but he couldn't stop grinning. The city was real now. It had walls. It had direction. Then the proximity alert pinged again, and this time it wasn't a wounded scout. This time it was surface patrols, 3 of them, moving in formation across the ruins directly above the facility's primary sensor grid. Their armor bore the sigil of Seok-jun, and they were carrying seismic detection equipment. The patrol leader was a man named Jang Ki-ho, a former military engineer Seok-jun kept on a very short leash. Ki-ho was short, balding, and dressed in a reinforced survey coat with at least 6 instrument panels strapped across his chest. He didn't carry a sword. He carried a seismic resonator, a ground-penetrating scanner, and 20 years of experience finding things that didn't want to be found. His 2 escorts were standard enforcers, big, quiet, and loyal to their paychecks, nothing special. But Ki-ho was the real threat, and our boy knew it the second the drone feed showed the man's gear. The team stopped 50 meters from the ruin's eastern edge, right on top of the sensor blind spot Do-hyun had mapped 3 days ago. Ki-ho knelt, pressed the resonator's baseplate into the dirt, and activated the first scan. A low-frequency pulse rippled through the soil, invisible to human senses, but lighting up every monitor in Do-hyun's command station like a fire alarm. He watched the waveform propagate in real time, a spreading blue ring that touched rock, metal, and void, and reported every difference back to Ki-ho's handheld display. The automaton core was too deep to register clearly. The facility's original builders had shielded it well, but Unit 02's fresh tunnel was another story. The polymer-sealed walls showed up on Ki-ho's screen as a perfect straight line, running southwest at a 30-degree angle. That wasn't natural geology, and nobody on that patrol team was stupid enough to miss it. Ki-ho tapped the screen, said something to the enforcers, and pointed toward the ruin's main collapse zone. They started moving. Our boy's fingers flew across the command interface, pulling up Unit 01's status and current position. The worker drone was in the upper scavenging tunnels, about 40 meters below the surface, and almost directly in the patrol's path. If Ki-ho's next scan caught a moving metal object that size, the game was over. Do-hyun opened the neural link, gave Unit 01 a single priority command, and sent it sprinting north. The drone's 6 legs clattered against stone loud enough to register on Ki-ho's audio pickups, which was exactly the point. Make noise, make distance, make them chase a ghost, while the real operation stayed buried and silent. Ki-ho's head snapped toward the signal, and his escorts drew their blades on reflex. They took the bait and followed the noise north, exactly as planned. On the surface, Unit 01 burst from a collapsed drainage culvert and scrambled across open rubble, its amber optical sensor swiveling to track the patrol's closing vector. Ki-ho shouted something, and one enforcer broke into a sprint, his boots throwing up gravel as he closed on the fleeing drone. The man was fast enough to get within 20 meters before Unit 01 ducked into a half-collapsed subway entrance and disappeared from sight. The enforcer stopped at the tunnel mouth, peered into the darkness and waved Ki-ho forward. Ki-ho arrived 30 seconds later, already checking his scanner. The signal was still moving, deeper into the old transit system, heading toward a section of collapsed tunnel 300 meters north. And that was where our boy wanted them. Unit 01 reached the designated false location, a dead-end chamber with old maintenance equipment, some scattered scrap, and absolutely nothing else. It stopped moving. Ki-ho's scanner showed the signal stationary, and he sent both enforcers in to investigate. They cleared the tunnel in 5 minutes, found the scrap, found the drone's tracks, and found the chamber. And that's where the trail ended. No hatch, no door, no hidden passage. Just a drone-shaped pile of scrap metal sitting in the corner with its optical sensor deliberately dimmed to. Stand by. The enforcers searched the walls, checked for false panels, and found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. But Ki-ho wasn't fooled. He knelt by the drone, ran his scanner directly over its chassis, and studied the energy signature. The automaton's internal power cell was still active, a faint, steady hum that matched the readings he'd picked up on the initial district sweep. He traced the drone's tread marks back the way it came, and his expression shifted from frustration to cold certainty. The tracks went south. They led directly back toward the area where his first scan had picked up the underground tunnel anomaly. The drone had led them away from something deliberately, and that meant it wasn't just a drone, it was a decoy. Ki-ho ordered his team to double back and widen the search grid immediately. They spread out across the eastern ruins and started scanning meter by meter, looking for any entrance, a hatch, a collapsed wall, a ventilation shaft, anything that could explain where the signal was strongest. It took them 3 hours, and in those 3 hours, our boy was working too. Do-hyun knew Ki-ho was too smart to give up after one dead end, so he'd prepped the emergency protocols the moment the patrol's sigil showed up on his sensors. He pulled up the facility layout and highlighted every structural weakness between the surface and the main base. There were 3 possible entry points that a determined search could uncover: 2 ventilation shafts and the original maintenance hatch he'd first crawled through. If Ki-ho found any of them, the base was compromised. If he found all 3, the base was dead. The maintenance hatch was the most exposed. It was barely concealed under a slab of collapsed concrete, and Ki-ho's scanner would spot the void beneath it within minutes of a focused search. So Do-hyun made a call that tasted like ash in his mouth. He routed the base's remaining demolition charges, the ones he'd salvaged from the old mining level a week ago, to the hatch's structural supports. The blast wouldn't be huge, but it didn't need to be huge. It just needed to collapse the tunnel behind the hatch and bury every trace of the entrance under 200 tons of rock. The cost was Unit 01. The drone was still in the dead-end chamber, cut off from the base by the patrol's position, and there was no way to extract it before Ki-ho closed the net. Do-hyun opened the neural link one last time, sent Unit 01 a final status query, and received a clean green confirmation. The drone was ready. The demolition command pulsed through the link, and somewhere far above him, the maintenance hatch's support beams detonated. The sound reached the command station as a deep, rolling thunder that vibrated through the floor and rattled every loose bolt in the assembly bay. On the surface feed, the eastern ruins collapsed inward, a slow, grinding sinkhole that swallowed concrete, rebar, and the maintenance hatch in one continuous roar. Ki-ho and his enforcers scrambled backward from the collapse zone, their scanner readings going haywire as the ground rearranged itself. When the dust settled, the hatch was gone. Unit 01's signal was gone too, crushed under the collapse or buried too deep for the link to penetrate. Do-hyun stared at the blank status indicator for a long, quiet moment. He didn't feel much. He'd built the drone from scrap in 2 days, and he could build another in less time with the tools he had now. But Unit 01 was his first, the first thing he'd made that moved and obeyed, and proved the city wasn't just a dead man's fantasy. And now, it was rubble. He closed the status window and turned back to the assembly bay, because the only thing that mattered right now was what came next. On the surface, Ki-ho stood at the edge of the new sinkhole, wiping dust from his scanner display. He studied the readings, checked the collapse pattern, and noted the blast residue that his chemical sniffer picked up near the crater rim. That wasn't a natural cave-in. Someone had triggered that collapse deliberately, which meant someone was down there, and that someone had something worth hiding. Ki-ho ordered his team to pull back and report to Seok-jun immediately. They withdrew from the ruins at dusk, their vehicle kicking up a plume of red dust as it headed toward the Territory Lord's main compound. The report Ki-ho filed that night was clinical and specific. Underground structure detected, unknown operator present, defensive measures active. Further investigation required with heavier assets. Moon Seok-jun read the report twice, then summoned his war council to the main hall. He was a tall man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that never blinked when he was angry. He wasn't angry now, he was interested, which was worse. He told the council that someone was living under his territory without his permission, and that someone had technology advanced enough to fool his best survey engineer. He wanted that technology. He wanted the person who built it, and he wanted a full expeditionary force assembled by the end of the week. The orders went out, and the compound began to stir with the ugly energy of a predator waking up. Down below, Do-hyun didn't know the details of Moon's reaction, but he didn't need to. Seok-jun was propped up on her cot in the medical bay when he walked in, her wound freshly bandaged, and her eyes sharper than they'd been that morning. She'd heard the blast, she'd felt the tremor, and she was smart enough to put the pieces together without him saying a word. She asked if the patrol found the entrance. He said they found it, but it's gone now. She asked what the patrol leader looked like. He described Ki-ho, short, bald, walking instrument panel with legs, and watched her face tighten. She knew the name. Ki-ho wasn't just some random survey tech, he was Moon's best, the guy who mapped the Wyvern's lair without losing a single scout and found the drainage tunnel that let Moon's forces flank the Blackhorn garrison 2 winters ago. If Ki-ho was on this, Moon wasn't going to send another patrol. He was going to send a full force. She told Do-hyun exactly that, her voice flat and matter-of-fact as she pulled herself upright on the cot. Moon doesn't demo test. Moon hits once, hits hard, and doesn't stop until whatever he's hitting is dead or his. Those were her exact words, and our boy believed every one of them. He asked how long he had. She said a week, maybe 10 days if Ki-ho's report was cautious enough to require verification drills. That wasn't long. That wasn't long at all. She didn't have time to rest, and neither did he. Ji-yoon could barely walk, but she could still read a map, and that was enough. She pointed to a thermal scan Do-hyun had pulled from Unit 02's deep mining logs. A cold void in the rock where the density readings went weird. A pocket. Do-hyun pulled up the drilling telemetry and cross-referenced it with the original facility schematics. The facility blueprints didn't show anything that far west, which meant whatever was down there predated the facility, or the facility's builders never found it. Either way, it was worth a look. He helped Ji-yoon to the command station, propped her leg on a crate, and handed her a data slate synced to the base sensors. She asked if he was seriously going to crawl into an unmapped cave alone. He wasn't going alone. Unit 02 was already in the western drift, chewing through granite at 12 meters per hour. Do-hyun grabbed a portable scanner, a backup power cell, and a handheld cutting torch from the assembly bay rack. Then he climbed into the newly cut service tunnel and started walking. The tunnel was rough. Unit 02 had prioritized speed over finish, so the walls were jagged and the floor was uneven. Do-hyun didn't mind. Every scratch on the stone meant his city was growing. The tunnel sloped downward for 200 meters, the temperature dropping with every step until his breath misted in the scanner's glow. At the end of the drift, Unit 02 sat idle, its drill head still smoking and its optical sensor glowing a steady amber. The void pocket was 3 meters past the current face. Do-hyun ordered Unit 02 to switch to precision mode and cut a narrow access shaft. The drone's drill reconfigured, the rotary head retracting, and a smaller diamond-tipped bit extending from the chassis, and it began carving a point crawlspace into the final wall. The stone here was softer, almost chalky, and the bit went through it like a hot knife through ration bars. After 10 minutes, the drill punched through into open air. Cold, wet air rushed through the hole, carrying a smell Do-hyun hadn't encountered before. Ozone, and wet stone, and something faintly organic, like a forest floor rotting under snow. He told Unit 02 to widen the opening, then squeezed through into the dark. His headlamp swept across a cavern that took his breath away. The ceiling was 30 meters high at least, studded with stalactites that glittered when the light hit them. The floor was a broken mess of collapsed columns and shallow pools of mineral water that reflected the lamp in pale green ripples. And at the far end of the cavern, half buried in a rockfall, was a door. Not a natural fissure or a crack in the stone. A door, rectangular and precise, its surface etched with geometric patterns Do-hyun had never seen before. Ji-yoon's voice crackled through the comm, asking what he'd found. He told her he found a dungeon. She went quiet for a long second, then asked if he was absolutely sure. He was sure. The door had the telltale shimmer of a dungeon gate, that faint, oily distortion in the air that every scavenger learned to recognize before they learned anything else. Dungeons meant monsters, but they also meant loot, and loot meant resources. Do-hyun pulled up the scanner and ran a full-spectrum sweep. The readings were off the chart. Whatever was behind that gate was dense with energy. the kind of energy signature that made his automaton core hum in sympathetic resonance. He ordered Unit 02 to begin mining the cavern walls while he examined the gate. The drone extended its mining arms and started carving into the nearest wall, its cutters sending chips of pale stone skittering across the floor. 3 cuts in, the cutter struck something that rang like a bell. The wall face shattered in a web of cracks, and blue light spilled through the fissures. Ji-yoon shouted through the comm, asking what that sound was. Do-hyun stepped closer and pulled a loose chunk of stone away from the fracture. Behind it, embedded in the rock like veins of frozen lightning, were crystals. Dozens of them, each one glowing with a steady blue-white light that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He touched one, and his scanner went berserk. The energy density was staggering. A single one of these crystals could power Unit 02 for a year without recharging. A cluster like this could run his entire assembly bay at full capacity for months. He told Ji-yoon they just found their power problem's solution, and right on cue, the dungeon gate flickered. The shimmer intensified, the oily distortion twisting into a spiral of sickly green light, and the door began to open. Do-hyun didn't wait to see what came out. He sprinted for the tunnel entrance, shouting for Unit 02 to disengage from the wall and prepare for hostiles. The drone pulled its cutters back and rotated its chassis to face the gate, its optical sensor flaring bright white. What came through the gate wasn't a single monster. It was a wave. Hundreds of insects, each one the size of a human fist, poured through the opening in a chittering green tide. Their bodies were translucent, their internal organs glowing with the same blue light as the crystals, and their mandibles clicked together with a sound like glass breaking. Crystal bugs. Do-hyun dragged himself into the access shaft just as the swarm hit Unit 02. The drone's cutter arm swung through the first rank, pulping a dozen bugs instantly. But for every one it killed, 3 more skittered over the corpses. They climbed the drone's chassis, their legs finding purchase in the joint seams, and started gnawing at the power conduits. Unit 2's damage indicators spiked yellow, then orange. Do-hyun pulled himself out of the shaft and sprinted back up the main tunnel, his boots slamming against the stone. The comm was chaos. Ji-yoon demanding to know what was happening, the base sensors screaming alerts, and Unit 02's status feed bleeding damage reports. He reached the command station in 4 minutes flat, gasping, and pulled up the assembly bay interface. He needed a combat unit, and he needed it now. The blueprints in the facility database included a dozen combat frames, but most required materials he didn't have. What he did have was a damaged drone on the front line, and a cavern full of crystals that could blow his entire base sky-high if the bugs chewed through the wrong conduit. He pulled up a frame called the ST-3 Scorpion, a light combat automaton designed for tunnel fighting, and stripped the blueprint down to its essentials. He didn't need armor plating. He needed firepower, speed, and something that could shoot. The assembly bay roared to life, fabricators running at emergency speed as they printed the Scorpion's chassis from whatever scrap was in the feed. Hoppers, legs first, 6 of them, articulated and razor-tipped, designed to skitter across broken terrain. Then the thorax, compact and dense, housing the power cell and targeting processor. Then the tail, a flexible, segmented limb tipped with a focusing crystal, harvested from the emergency stores. Do-hyun didn't have a proper weapon crystal, but he had something close. The thermal regulator from the old ventilation system was a precision-cut quartz array designed to handle massive energy loads. He pulled it from storage, fitted it into the tail housing, and wired it directly into the power core. It wasn't a laser cannon, but it would focus enough energy to melt through bug carapace. He named it Unit 03, pushed the activation command, and didn't wait for the full boot sequence. The Scorpion unfolded on the assembly cradle, its legs clicking against the metal surface as it orientated itself. Its optical sensor, a single compound lens mounted in the thorax, locked onto Do-hyun for half a second. Then it turned and scuttled toward the tunnel at a speed that made the floor vibrate. Do-hyun grabbed his command slate and linked to Unit 03's sensor feed. He saw what Unit 02 was seeing. A wall of blue-green chitin and clicking mandibles, the drone's optical sensor flickering as bugs crawled across the lens. Unit 02's cutter arm was still swinging, but its movements were slow now, its power levels dropping fast. Unit 03 hit the cavern like a thunderbolt. Didn't slow down or circle for position. It just charged straight into the swarm, its legs impaling bugs with every step, and raised its tail. The thermal regulator lit up white-hot. A beam of concentrated energy lanced out from the tail tip. Not a clean laser pulse, but a raw, unfocused torrent of heat that turned the air to steam and the nearest bugs to vapor. The swarm recoiled. The bugs that weren't vaporized scrambled away from the new threat, their chittering rising to a frantic screech. Unit 03 rotated its thorax, tracking the swarm's movement, and fired again. A line of bugs exploded into glowing mist. 3 more shots, and the swarm broke entirely, the survivors flooding back toward the dungeon gate, their formation shattered. Their advance turned into a rout. Unit 03 pursued them through the gate without hesitation. Do-hyun watched through the sensor feed as the Scorpion entered the dungeon proper. It was a narrow, crystalline passage, the walls coated in the same blue glowing mineral that ran through the cavern outside. The bugs were fleeing deeper into the dungeon, and Unit 03 followed the glow. The passage opened into a central chamber, and Do-hyun's breath caught. At the chamber's heart, suspended in a web of crystalline filaments, was a crystal the size of his torso. It wasn't blue like the others, it was white, pure and blinding, pulsing with a steady rhythm that made the entire dungeon hum. A stability crystal, the kind of power source the old world built reactors around. One of those could run his entire operation for decades. The remaining bugs were clustered around it, their bodies pressed against the crystal like worshippers at an altar. Unit 03 didn't care about their religion. The Scorpion's tail fired twice, clearing the last of the swarm, and then it stood alone in the chamber with the crystal. Do-hyun climbed back through the tunnel toward the cavern, his command slate still showing the feed. He passed Unit 02 on the way. The mining drone was still standing, barely, its chassis scarred, and one of its cutter arms hanging by a single hydraulic cable. He patted the drone's hull and told it to limp back to the maintenance bay. Then he entered the cavern, stepped over the smoking bug corpses, and walked through the dungeon gate. The crystal chamber was smaller than it looked on the feed, maybe 10 meters across, the walls close and warm. The stability crystal was warm, too. Not hot, but warm in a way that felt deliberate, like a living thing holding its breath. Do-hyun reached out and touched the surface. The energy surge knocked him flat. Not painful, exactly, but overwhelming. A flood of raw power that made his teeth ache and his vision swim with afterimages. Crystal was alive with energy, and it was connected to every other crystal in the dungeon, forming a network that stretched through the rock like a second circulatory system. He understood the bugs now. They weren't worshipping the crystal, they were feeding on its excess energy, and the crystal was using them to spread its network. It was symbiotic, and he was about to break the symbiosis. He ordered Unit 03 to sever the crystalline filaments connecting the stability crystal to the chamber walls. The Scorpion's legs worked with surgical precision, slicing through the glowing strands one by one. Each cut sent a pulse of light racing through the dungeon, and the hum in the air grew louder. When the last filament snapped, the entire dungeon shuddered. The walls cracked, the floor split, and from somewhere deep in the rock came a sound like a mountain groaning in its sleep. Unit 03 grabbed the stability crystal in its forward legs and scuttled for the exit. Do-hyun ran ahead, shouting for Ji-yoon to brace for impact. They cleared the gate with seconds to spare. The dungeon collapsed behind them, not a slow cave-in, but a total structural failure that crushed the entrance chamber into a solid plug of crushed crystal and powdered stone. The cavern shook hard enough to drop stalactites from the ceiling. Above ground, the tremors hit the surface as a 4.2 magnitude quake that rattled windows in Moon's compound and set every seismic sensor screaming. In the observation bunker, the duty officer stared at his console and reached for the direct line to Ki-ho. The underground signal had just gone from anomalous to impossible to ignore. Do-hyun stood in the cavern, covered in crystal dust and breathing hard, watching Unit 03 carry the stability crystal toward the tunnel. He didn't know that Moon's people had felt the quake. He didn't know that Ki-ho was already pulling the seismic data for analysis. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The clock had just sped up, and now he had the power to meet it. Moon Seok-jun stood at the window of his command tower, watching the dust plume from the quake still hanging over the eastern ruins. His fingers drummed against the windowsill, a slow and deliberate rhythm that made his adjutant flinch. Ki-ho's report sat open on the desk behind him, the seismic charts annotated in red ink. An underground energy signature that spiked off the measurement scale, a deliberate tunnel collapse. And now, a 4.2 quake centered exactly where his scout team got buried. Someone was down there, and they had technology that shouldn't exist anymore. Moon turned from the window and gave a single order: assemble the strike force. Not a patrol, not a scouting party, a full combat deployment with the Wyvern. The Wyvern had cost him 47 soldiers to capture from a B-rank dungeon 3 years ago, and feeding it had cost him more rations than a platoon. It was a nightmare wrapped in gray-black scales, 20 meters from snout to tail, with a furnace burning in its chest that let it spit streams of molten fire hot enough to turn stone to glass. Moon walked to the containment pit himself and ordered the beast handlers to saddle it. The Wyvern's head swung toward him, one yellow eye the size of a dinner plate tracking his movement. It didn't respect him. Wyverns respected nothing, but it understood the pain collar clamped around its throat, and that was enough. By dawn the next morning, Moon had 60 soldiers armored and assembled in the compound yard, with the Wyvern crouched in their midst like a siege weapon given flesh. Moon addressed them from the back of his command vehicle, his voice carrying flat and cold across the formation. He told them there was an unknown operator beneath the ruins, someone with pre-collapse technology, someone who had already killed good soldiers with a buried explosive. He told them they were going to dig that rat out and take everything he had, and if the rat was lucky, he'd die in the collapse. And if he wasn't lucky, Moon added, they'd pull him out piece by piece until he talked. The formation moved out before the sun cleared the ridge. Ji-yoon's warning reached Do-hyun through a surface contact she still maintained, a teenage courier named Rin, who ran messages between scavenger crews for half rations. Rin had seen the Wyvern being saddled the night before, and by the time her message reached Ji-yoon's hidden drop point, the strike force was already 3 kilometers out. Ji-yoon sprinted back through the tunnels and found Do-hyun in the maintenance bay, welding new armor plating onto Unit 02's damaged chassis. She didn't slow down, didn't catch her breath, just grabbed his shoulder and told him Moon was coming with everything. Do-hyun's welder hissed and died. He asked how many, and Ji-yoon said 60 soldiers, plus the Wyvern. He asked how long, and she said less than 3 hours. Our boy stood there for maybe 5 seconds, the light from the stability crystal playing blue across his face. And then he started giving orders. He told Ji-yoon to seal the habitation module and move the crystal core into the deepest storage chamber. He told Unit 02 to abandon repairs and begin drilling a collapse pattern in the tertiary access tunnels. He pulled up the command slate and overclocked Unit 03's combat protocols, dumping every spare processor cycle into targeting algorithms and threat priority logic. The Scorpion's optical sensors lit up brighter, its tail thrashing once as the new directives flooded its system. Then Do-hyun pulled up the tunnel map and planned his trap. He had Unit 02 bore out 3 parallel shafts just below the surface access point, spacing them exactly 4 meters apart and packing the connecting walls with instability charges scavenged from old mining equipment. The idea wasn't to kill Moon's entire force, he didn't have the firepower for that, but to take away their mobility and split their formation. Unit 2's damaged cutter arm shrieked as it carved through granite, spraying sparks that bounced off the tunnel walls like burning rain. The charges went in, the detonators wired to a separate control channel on the slate. Then Do-hyun positioned Unit 03 in a side cavern 30 meters northeast of the main entrance, where a natural chimney gave the Scorpion a firing lane on anyone approaching from the west. And then he waited. Moon's advanced scouts reached the ruins 90 minutes later, marking the collapsed entrance with beacons for the main force. The Wyvern landed on the ridge above the excavation site with a sound like a building falling over, its claws gouging furrows into the stone, its breath steaming in the cold morning air. Moon dismounted from his command vehicle and walked to the edge of the collapse zone, studying the rubble with the flat expression of a man who has seen 100 sieges and won 98 of them. He ordered the engineers forward with ground-penetrating scanners. The soldiers formed a perimeter, crossbows loaded with armor-piercing bolts. 3 squad leaders rotating their fire teams in overlapping arcs. They were professionals, these men, veterans of the territory wars who had stormed fortified bunkers and cleared dungeon nests and put down 2 separate rebellions. They knew what they were doing. They just didn't know what they were walking into. Do-hyun watched them through a pinhole camera hidden in a rock formation, the feed grainy and flickering, but clear enough to show the Wyvern's silhouette against the sky. He tracked the engineers as they moved toward the collapse zone, and he tracked Moon standing 10 meters behind them with his arms crossed. And he waited until the first squad moved past the trigger point. Then he hit the charge. The ground beneath the forward squad didn't just collapse. It opened like a trapdoor, dropping 8 soldiers into a pit lined with twisted rebar and broken stone. 3 of them died on impact. 2 more broke legs or spines. The remaining 3 scrambled for purchase on the crumbling walls, shouting for extraction. And while the second squad rushed forward to pull their comrades out, Do-hyun sent Unit 03 into the flank. The Scorpion came out of the chimney at full sprint, its 6 legs hammering across the rock, its thermal regulator already glowing white. The first soldier who turned toward the sound caught a laser shot through the chest before he could raise his crossbow. The second soldier managed to fire, but the bolt glanced off Unit 03's armored chassis with a sound like a spoon hitting a pot. The Scorpion's tail whipped around and impaled him through the shoulder, lifting him off his feet and hurling him into 3 other soldiers like a rag doll. The flank collapsed into chaos, men shouting, bolt trajectories crossing in panicked volleys, squad leaders screaming for a formation that wouldn't hold. Unit 03 cut through them like a scythe through wheat. 5 kills in the first 12 seconds, 7 in 20. The thermal regulator cycled down to vent heat, and the Scorpion paused for a fraction of a second to recalibrate. That was when Seok-jun gave the Wyvern its kill command. The Wyvern's chest swelled, the scales around its throat splitting to reveal the furnace glow beneath. And then it exhaled a cone of liquid fire that turned the entire side cavern into an oven. The rock walls didn't just heat up, they slagged, melting into glowing orange rivulets that dripped down into the darkness below. Unit 3's chassis withstood the first blast, the crystal core absorbing the thermal energy and routing it through the emergency venting system. But the second blast came before the vents could cycle, and the third blast followed before the Scorpion could even move. Do-hyun watched the telemetry go red on his slate. Armor integrity at 40%, optical sensors failing, thermal regulator cracking, servo motor response dropping to emergency minimums. Unit 03 tried to fire back, the tail thrashing once and sending a wild laser shot that went wide and hit nothing. The Wyvern just inhaled and breathed again. The fourth blast melted Unit 03's legs into the stone, fusing the chassis to the floor of a cave that was now more glass than rock. The Scorpion's core went critical, venting energy in a final pulse that shut down every remaining system. The feed from Unit 03 died in a burst of static, and Do-hyun was alone with a blank screen and the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Moon stood at the edge of the slag pit, looking down at the half-melted automaton chassis, and his expression changed. The flat, professional assessment was gone, replaced by something hungrier. He crouched, ignoring the heat still radiating from the glassy stone, and studied the Scorpion's design, the crystal core housing, the articulated joints, the thermal regulator that had nearly held against a Wyvern's breath. This wasn't salvaged, pre-collapse junk, the kind of mothballed war machines that anyone could find if they dug deep enough in the right ruins. This was new. This was built. This was created by someone with an active manufacturing capability and a power source that could run it. Moon stood up and turned to Ki-ho, his eyes bright with a greed that made even the veteran officer take a step back. He told Ki-ho that the target was not to be killed. He told Ki-ho to relay to every soldier on the perimeter that the man underground was now the single most valuable asset in the entire territory. Moon wanted him alive, and he wanted every piece of his equipment intact. Then Do-hyun triggered the second set of charges, and the mountain came down. The rock slide started at the ridgeline and swept downward in a gray-black wave of stone and dust that moved faster than any man could run. Moon's soldiers scattered, the perimeter dissolving as men threw themselves behind boulders or dove into half-collapsed trenches. The Wyvern screamed and launched skyward just ahead of the slide, its wings hammering the air, its claws raking a soldier's shoulder as it clawed for altitude. The slide buried the forward approach, entombing the slag pit and Unit 03's remains under 30 meters of rubble, and it also buried Unit 02, which had been positioned in a support tunnel to relay commands. Do-hyun didn't hear the mining drone's final signal. The slate went dead before the collapse warning could even process. But he felt the loss in the sudden silence on the command channel. 2 units gone in less than an hour. Moon's strike force regrouped on the high ground 2 kilometers back, battered and bloodied, but still functional. The Wyvern circled overhead, its furnace glow visible even through the dust cloud that hung over the battlefield. Moon counted his losses: 14 dead, 9 wounded, 1 elite combat automaton melted, 1 rock slide that had nearly killed him personally, and smiled. Because the rock slide confirmed everything he needed to know. The underground operator was smart enough to plan a multi-stage ambush, resourceful enough to sacrifice valuable assets without hesitation, and desperate enough to bring down a mountain to protect his position, which meant the operator had something worth protecting. Moon ordered a full siege to begin immediately. Every known exit from the underground tunnel network was to be located, mapped, and blockaded with rotating patrols. He pulled 2 additional companies from the garrison, ordering them to establish supply depots on the perimeter and prepare for a long-term operation. He told Ki-ho to requisition every piece of detection equipment in the territory and deploy it in a grid that would make any movement underground. Register on a dozen independent sensors. And then he sent a message to every scavenger crew, every merchant caravan, and every informant in the region. Anyone who tried to supply the underground operator would be executed, and anyone who provided information leading to his capture would receive a year's worth of rations and a noble title. The noose was closing, and Moon wanted Do-hyun to feel every centimeter of it tightening. Do-hyun slumped against the wall of the maintenance bay, the dead slate clutched in his hands, and looked at what he had left. The stability crystal was still glowing in its storage cradle, pulsing with enough power to run a small city. The fabrication forge was still operational, and he had enough scrap metal and salvaged components to build maybe one more unit before the materials ran out. Ji-yoon was still alive, crouched in the corner with her crossbow across her knees, watching him with eyes that had seen men lose hope before. He told her the truth. Unit 03 was gone. Unit 02 was buried. Moon had blockaded every exit, and the food stores in the HAB module would last maybe 6 weeks. Ji-yoon didn't flinch. She asked what he was going to build next. Do-hyun looked at the stability crystal, then at the fabrication forge, then at the blueprints he'd been sketching on a scrap of metal sheeting for the past 3 days. He didn't need a lot of materials. He needed the right design. Something Moon wouldn't see coming. Something that didn't fight like Unit 03 fought. He pulled up the design on his slate and started feeding the specifications into the forge. And outside, the Wyvern circled endlessly overhead, waiting for him to surface. The stability crystal sat in its cradle, pulsing with a slow blue light that made the entire maintenance bay feel like the inside of a beating heart. Do-hyun ran the power conduits himself, hands steady despite the exhaustion dragging at his shoulders. One wrong coupling and the feedback would vaporize him. No second chances, no reset button. The fabrication forge hadn't been designed for a crystal this dense, but that's what the regulator manifold was for. He bolted the manifold into place, double-checked the thermal shielding, and threw the main breaker. The forge roared to life. And just like that, the game changed. That single crystal could now push the forge to output levels the original engineers probably only dreamed about. Full automation, faster print cycles, exotic alloy tolerances. Moon's blacksmiths couldn't match in a lifetime. Do-hyun stepped back and watched the status lights flicker green across the board. Ji-yoon whistled low from her corner and asked if he was planning to build an entire factory down here. Our boy didn't even look up from the control slate. He told her that was exactly the plan. The first thing he did with the upgraded forge was scrap every combat schematic he'd been sketching for the past 3 days. Unit 03 had been a brawler, and the Wyvern had turned it into slag in under 2 seconds flat. So building a bigger brawler wasn't the answer. He needed something Moon couldn't hit, because Moon wouldn't see it coming until it was already gone. The design that came together on his slate looked like a nightmare made of 8 jointed legs and a chassis no bigger than a bread loaf. Spider form locomotion, adaptive camo plating that bent light across the visible spectrum, a sensor package that could map thermal and seismic signatures from half a kilometer out, and 0 weapons. Not a single gun, not a blade, not a laser emitter on the entire frame. Ji-yoon leaned over his shoulder, squinted at the blueprint, and asked if he'd finally lost his mind. Do-hyun told her that fighting Moon head-on was a losing game, and the winning move was knowing every single thing Moon did before Moon knew it himself. The forge took the new schematic and started printing before he'd even finished the diagnostic checklist. Layer by layer, the spider took shape under the assembly arm, alloy bones snapping into joints, camo skin unfurling across the chassis, optical cluster cycling through focus tests mid-print. 6 hours from concept to completion, and that was only because he'd had to recalibrate the thermal regulator twice on the camo layer. When the assembly arm finally retracted, Unit 04 sat on the forge bed like a polished obsidian sculpture, utterly silent and almost invisible, even without the cloak engaged. Do-hyun pinged its command channel and felt the unit answer with a clean, fast handshake. No lag, no signal degradation. He ordered it to cycle the camo. Unit 04 vanished, not translucent, not shimmering like heat haze, just gone. The forge bed behind it perfectly visible, as if nothing occupied the space at all. Ji-yoon swore and took an involuntary step backward. Our boy grinned for the first time since the rock slide. Unit 4's first surface run happened that night. The spider slipped through a ventilation shaft Do-hyun had mapped weeks earlier, too narrow for a human, but perfect for a chassis the size of a small dog, and emerged into cold night air without triggering a single one of Moon's perimeter sensors. Do-hyun sat in the command chair with the slate on his knees, watching the world above through Unit 4's optical cluster, like he was playing the strangest stealth game ever made. The spider moved along the ridgeline, 8 legs finding purchase on loose scree and bare rock without dislodging a single pebble. Below it, Moon's patrols walked their rotations, boots crunching on gravel, breath fogging in the cold. They never looked up. Unit 4 kept climbing, mapping every supply tent, every sensor post, every sleeping soldier in the perimeter camp. By the time the Moon had crossed half the sky, Do-hyun had a complete tactical overlay of Moon's siege positions, troop counts, shift changes, gaps in the detection grid that a clever operator could exploit. But the real prize came when Unit 04 crested the far ridge and pointed its optical cluster east. 3 kilometers out, nestled in a valley that the war hadn't touched yet, There was a compound surrounded by wooden walls and lit by steady, clean lantern light. Neutral Merchant Guild Outpost, still flying the guild's banner, 3 coins on a gray field, which meant Moon's blockade hadn't reached it yet. Do-hyun tagged the location and saved the route. The spider pulled back, retracing its path with the same perfect silence, and slipped back into the ventilation shaft 20 minutes before dawn. Ji-yoon was waiting when he came out of the command chair, already lacing up her surface boots. She'd been watching the feed over his shoulder, and she'd made her decision before he could even open his mouth. She told him she could make the outpost on foot in half a day, trade for what they needed, and be back before the next moonrise. Do-hyun told her it was too dangerous. She pointed out that Moon's soldiers were looking for an underground operator, not a lone scout who'd been running these hills since before Moon even claimed the territory. He didn't have a counter-argument for that. She left at first light, moving fast and low along a game trail that Unit 04 had marked as clear of patrols. With a pack full of intelligence reports, Moon's troop dispositions, supply routes, shift rotations, that the guild would pay good coin to get their hands on. Do-hyun watched her progress through the spider's optical cluster, which he'd repositioned on a high crag overlooking the valley approach. She made the outpost in just under 6 hours, walking through the front gate like she owned the place. The guild factor was a whip-thin woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who listened to Ji-yoon's pitch without interrupting once. When Ji-yoon finished, the factor named a price for the intelligence that was triple what Do-hyun had estimated. The guild didn't like Moon Seok-jun either, it turned out, and they'd been looking for leverage. Ji-yoon walked out of the compound 4 hours later with a pack loaded with dried rations, medical supplies, and 20 kilos of refined alloy powder that would keep the forge running for another month at full capacity. She was halfway back when Unit 04 detected the second heat signature. Someone was following her, not a patrol. The movement pattern was wrong, too precise, too patient, staying just outside visual range but never losing the trail. Do-hyun zoomed the optical cluster and caught a glimpse of dark clothing, a thin frame, and a blade harness that screamed professional. The assassin moved like smoke over broken ground, closing the distance by increments, waiting for the right moment. Our boy's heart rate spiked, but his hand stayed steady on the slate. He told Unit 04 to shadow the threat and relay continuous positioning data while he pulled up the approach tunnel schematics. If the assassin wanted to follow Ji-yoon, then Do-hyun was going to give him exactly the welcome he deserved. Ji-yoon reached the ridgeline an hour before sunset, and Do-hyun pinged her short-range comm with the bad news. She didn't break stride, didn't look back, didn't do anything that would tip the tale. She just asked if he had a plan. He told her to lead the target into the east drainage culvert, and then go flat behind the third support beam. Unit 04 repositioned to the culvert ceiling and engaged its camo, becoming nothing more than a faint shimmer that even a trained eye would dismiss as heat haze. Ji-yoon walked into the culvert, counted the beams, and dropped behind the third one with her crossbow already drawn. 10 seconds later, the assassin followed her in. He was good, moving low, checking corners, blade already in hand and ready to throw. But he was looking for a woman in scout leathers, not an invisible spider clinging to the stone directly above his head. Unit 04 dropped. The assassin reacted fast, twisting mid-stride and getting his blade up. But the spider's 8 legs wrapped around his torso before he could complete the motion. One limb pressed a microdose sedative injector against his neck. He thrashed once, then twice. Then his eyes rolled back, and the knife clattered to the stone. Do-hyun exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Ji-yoon stood up, walked over to the unconscious man, and nudged him with her boot. She asked Do-hyun what he wanted to do with this one. Our boy was already pulling up the holding cell schematics on his slate. He told her they were going to have a conversation, and the assassin was going to tell them everything he knew about Moon Seok-jun's supply lines. The interrogation took place in a storage alcove Do-hyun had converted into a holding cell. Reinforced door. No windows. Single chair bolted to the floor. The assassin woke up strapped to that chair with his blade harness hanging on the wall behind Do-hyun's shoulder, just visible enough to remind him what he'd lost. Ji-yoon stood in the corner with her crossbow, and Unit 04 clung to the ceiling directly above the prisoner's head, a silent, 8-legged promise that escape wasn't on the menu. The assassin's name was Tae-won, and he broke faster than Do-hyun expected. Not because he was weak, because he was a professional who knew when the job had gone sideways and saw no profit in dying for a client who wasn't paying hazard rates. He told Do-hyun everything. Moon's entire siege operation ran through a single central supply depot, positioned 5 kilometers east of the perimeter, where 3 major supply roads converged. The depot held weapons, rations, medical gear, and enough Wyvern-grade feed to keep the beast hunting for another month. More importantly, it held the sensor calibration equipment that Moon's detection grid depended on. Destroy the depot, and Moon's siege collapses overnight. No food, no replacement parts, no way to maintain the sensor net, and a hungry wyvern that would start eating its own handlers within a week. Do-hyun listened to every word, recorded it all on his slate, and cross-referenced the locations against Unit 04's surface map. Every detail matched. He looked at Ji-yoon, and she looked back at him with the same cold calculation in her eyes. They both knew what came next. Do-hyun pulled up the depot schematics Taewon had sketched from memory, and the layout was a thing of beauty. 3 warehouses, a fuel bunker, 2 barracks, and a command post, all crammed into a valley bowl with exactly 1 road in and 1 road out. Whoever designed it was counting on the choke point to keep raiders out. Our boy looked at that same choke point and saw a kill box. He marked the fuel bunker and the primary weapons warehouse with red circles on his slate, then started running the numbers on blast radius and structural collapse. Ji-yoon watched him work for a solid 10 minutes before she spoke up. She asked if he was planning to walk in there himself with a bag of explosives. Do-hyun didn't look up from the slate. He told her he had a better idea. The fabrication forge hummed to life at full capacity, spitting out components faster than Do-hyun could slot them together. He cannibalized 3 worker drones for their servo assemblies and pulled the cloaking array from Unit 04's original prototype housing to build a second stealth unit. 20 hours of non-stop work later, Unit 05 booted up for the first time. Same spider chassis as its predecessor, same adaptive camo skin. But this one was built for a single purpose, and Do-hyun didn't bother hiding it. Every joint was packed with microcharges, every leg housed a shaped explosive, and the abdomen carried a primary payload that could turn a concrete bunker into a crater. Unit 05 was a bomb with legs, and it scuttled up to Unit 04 like a puppy meeting its older brother. Ji-yoon took one look at the thing and called it the ugliest suicide drone she'd ever seen. Do-hyun just shrugged and said, "Ugly worked." He uploaded the mission parameters to both units in a single batch transfer. Unit 04 would handle infiltration and targeting. Unit 05 was the delivery system. The plan was simple on paper and insane in practice. 2 spiders walk into the most heavily guarded depot in Moon's territory. One plants charges, the other waits. At the signal, they turn the whole valley into a fireball, and neither one is coming back. Do-hyun set the mission clock and activated both units' camo arrays. They faded to nothing and started the long climb to the surface. The depot sat in a shallow depression between 2 ridgelines, surrounded by razor wire fencing and patrolled by guards who looked bored out of their minds. Do-hyun watched through Unit 04's optical feed as it crested the eastern ridge and got its first look at the target. The scale was bigger than Taewon's sketch had suggested. 4 warehouses, not 3. A motor pool with armored transports, a wyvern feeding pen positioned at the far end of the valley with its own dedicated guard detail, and everywhere, stacked crates of supplies waiting for distribution to the siege line. Moon had been stockpiling for a long campaign, and it showed. Unit 04 mapped every structure, every patrol route, every blind spot between the floodlights, and fed the data back to Do-hyun's slate in real time. The infiltration window opened at 3 in the morning when the guard rotation changed and the eastern perimeter went dark for exactly 90 seconds. Unit 4 crossed the fence line first, its legs working between the razor wire without touching a single strand. Unit 05 followed 6 meters behind, bulkier but just as silent, its primary payload cradled tight against its abdomen. They moved through the depot like ghosts, sticking to the shadows between buildings, freezing whenever a patrol passed within arm's reach. One guard stopped 3 feet from Unit 04 to light a cigarette, and the spider didn't even twitch. Do-hyun held his breath and waited until the guard walked away before giving the advance command. Unit 04 reached the fuel bunker first. It extruded a cutting filament from its forward manipulator and sliced through the ventilation grate in one smooth motion, then slipped inside. The bunker was packed with barrels of refined Wyvern-grade combustion fuel stacked floor to ceiling, and the fumes were so thick the optical feed started to haze. Unit 04 planted 4 shaped charges on the support columns and moved on. Unit 05 squeezed through the same vent and positioned itself directly beneath the central fuel stack. Its payload timer synced to Unit 04's detonation sequence. The 2 units exchanged a final data ping, and then they split up. Unit 04 headed for the primary weapons warehouse, while Unit 05 crawled up the interior wall of the fuel bunker and waited. It was never coming back out, and it didn't need to. The weapons warehouse was a long prefab structure with reinforced doors and a guard post at each end. Unit 4 bypassed the doors entirely by climbing the exterior wall and cutting through the roof with its filament, dropping silently into the rafters above rows of stacked arms crates. Do-hyun zoomed the feed and cataloged the inventory. Assault rifles, grenade cases, mortar tubes, ammunition boxes stamped with Moon's personal seal. Enough firepower to equip a small army for a month of sustained combat. All of it about to become scrap metal. Unit 4 planted charges at 8 structural points and then crawled back up to the roof to move on. The secondary targets went faster. Charges on the ration warehouse's refrigeration units. Charges on the motor pool's fuel pumps. Charges on the command post's comm tower, positioned to bring the whole thing down on top of the radio equipment. By the time the eastern sky started to lighten, Unit 04 had placed 23 charges across 12 different structures, and the depot's morning shift was starting to stir. A cook walked past the ration warehouse, smacking a metal ladle against a pot to wake up the barracks. Do-hyun checked the mission clock and decided he'd cut it as close as he dared. He gave Unit 04 the withdraw command. The Spider pulled back to the western ridge, slipping between patrols with the same silent precision it had shown on the way in, and settled into a observation position 300 meters from the fence line. Unit 05 was still inside the fuel bunker, its timer counting down, its payload armed and waiting. Do-hyun looked at the tactical display one last time. Every charge showed green. Every target was locked. He pressed the detonator. The fuel bunker went first. A column of fire punched through the roof and climbed 300 feet into the dawn sky, followed by a pressure wave that flattened the guard post next to it and shattered windows across the entire valley. 6 seconds later, the weapons warehouse erupted, and the secondary explosions from the ammunition inside kept going for another full minute. The ration warehouse collapsed sideways. The motor pool turned into a chain of smaller blasts as each vehicle's fuel tank cooked off. The comm tower folded in the middle and crashed down onto the command post, crushing the building like a tin can. By the time the explosion stopped, the depot wasn't a depot anymore. It was a smoldering hole in the ground, with flames still licking at what was left of the perimeter fence. And the only things moving were the survivors dragging themselves out of the wreckage. Do-hyun watched through Unit 04's feed for another 30 seconds, just long enough to confirm that the Wyvern pen had taken blast damage and the beast was shrieking in its chains. And then he pulled the unit out. It was over. The news hit Moon's command tent 3 hours later, delivered by a lieutenant who looked like he'd rather swallow his own sword than be the messenger. 17 dead, 40 plus wounded, the entire supply reserve reduced to ash, and the Wyvern was going berserk in its damaged pen. Moon listened without interrupting, which was somehow worse than if he'd started screaming. Then he gave the lieutenant a single order: pull every unit back to the fortress within the week, because there was no point maintaining a siege when his soldiers were going to start starving in 4 days. The lieutenant saluted and practically ran out of the tent. Moon sat alone for a long time after that, staring at the tactical map with its neat marker lines now completely irrelevant. Someone down there had just crippled his entire operation with 2 invisible machines and a handful of explosives. And Moon still didn't know the bastard's name. That was going to change. Word of the depot's destruction spread faster than the fire had, which was saying something. By nightfall, every soldier on the siege line knew the supply hub was gone, and the math wasn't hard. No food meant no pay. No pay meant no reason to stay. The desertion started as a trickle, a few men slipping away during watch change, a squad that didn't report back from patrol. Within 2 days, entire platoons were walking off, leaving their equipment behind, heading for the border, or looking for work with the merchant guilds. Moon's officers tried to stop it, even made a few examples, but you can't execute an army into staying. By the end of the week, Moon's siege force had shrunk from 2,000 soldiers to about 700, and most of those were the core loyalists, too deep in Moon's debt to run. The blockade was broken, the perimeter was porous, and Do-hyun's supply lines were open again. Ji-yoon made the run to the guild outpost 2 days after the explosions and came back with fresh rations, medical restock, and a piece of news that made Do-hyun stop working for a solid minute. The guild factor wanted to pass along a message. Moon Seok-jun's sudden weakness hadn't gone unnoticed by the other territory lords, and one of them was already on the move. His name was Hyojin-soo, and he controlled the territory directly east of Moon's domain. He was a younger lord, more ambitious than smart, and he'd been waiting for an opening to expand his borders for years. The moment his scouts confirmed the depot was gone and Moon's army was bleeding deserters, he started mobilizing. Hyo Jin-soo moved his troops faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the depot fire, a column of armored vehicles crossed the eastern border and seized an outpost that Moon had stripped of defenders to reinforce the siege line. There was no warning, no declaration, just a dawn assault that caught the skeleton crew completely off guard. By the time Moon's remaining command staff figured out what was happening, Hyo had already taken 2 more positions and was rolling toward the main fortress with 600 soldiers and a pair of tamed dungeon trolls that his handlers drove forward like living battering rams. Moon's scouts estimated Hyo would reach the fortress walls within a week. Do-hyun sat in his workshop and stared at the strategic map with a cold smile spreading across his face. He hadn't planned for this. He'd blown up a supply depot to break a siege, not to start a war between lords. But now that the war was here, our boy was smart enough to see the opportunity staring him right in the face. If Moon and Hyo were busy killing each other, neither one of them would be looking underground. Do-hyun called Ji-yoon over to the map table and pointed at Hyo's line of advance. He told her they weren't done yet. If Hyo Jin-soo was marching on Moon's fortress, then the one thing that could stop him was a preemptive counterattack. Moon would need to strike first, hit Hyo's staging ground before the trolls reached the walls, or he'd lose everything. But Moon was cautious, paranoid, and running on half his usual intelligence network thanks to the depot strike. He might hesitate. He might wait for certainty. And certainty was something Do-hyun could manufacture. He pulled up Unit 04's mission log and started outlining the new plan. Ji-yoon listened for about 30 seconds before she started grinning. She told him he was a devious little gremlin, and she meant it as a compliment. Unit 4 crept into Hyo Jin-soo's forward camp 2 nights after the border outpost fell. The camp was loud and chaotic, nothing like Moon's disciplined siege lines. Hyo's soldiers were celebrating their easy victories with looted alcohol and bonfires big enough to ruin their night vision. The spider slipped past the sentries without breaking camo and made its way to the command tent, where Hyo's field officers kept their dispatch records. The plan was delicate. Do-hyun had forged a set of orders on his slate, formatted to match the military dispatch style that Taewon had described during interrogation, and loaded them into Unit 04's data core. The orders were from Moon Seok-jun to a non-existent strike commander, detailing an imminent assault on Hyo's main encampment with a force of 500 soldiers and the Wyvern. The language was urgent, the timing was specific, and the attack was supposedly scheduled for 3 days from now. Unit 04 uploaded the doctored orders to the camp's unsecured dispatch terminal, buried them in a folder of routine reports where they'd look like something an overworked clerk had misfiled, and then slipped back out into the night. Do-hyun waited. 2 days later, Hyo's scouts found the folder during a routine intelligence sweep. The reaction was exactly what Do-hyun had hoped for. Hyo Jin-soo, convinced that Moon was about to strike his flank, decided to strike first. He accelerated his advance from cautious to reckless, abandoning his supply lines to push his army straight toward Moon's fortress at maximum speed. His officers argued against it, pointed out the risks of overextending. But Hyo was young and scared, and certain that hesitation would get him killed. He ordered a full assault. The 2 armies met in the valley outside Moon's fortress 3 days later, and the result was chaos. Moon's defenders had the walls and the high ground. Hyo's forces had the trolls and momentum. The battle raged for 2 days without a clear winner, both sides taking heavy losses, both lords refusing to back down. And underground, beneath the blood-soaked valley, Do-hyun's forge kept humming. He wasn't done yet. Not even close. Hyo Jin-soo's army doesn't knock on the gates. They bring the whole mountain down on them. 2 dungeon trolls slam through the outer barricade like it's made of wet cardboard, and 600 soldiers pour into the kill zone behind them. Moon's defenders on the walls fire down with crossbows and salvaged mana rifles, but the trolls soak the damage and keep swinging, turning sentry towers into splinters. Moon Seok-jun himself strides onto the parapet, sword drawn, shouting orders to hold the line. He's calm. He's been calm for 30 years of war, and he isn't about to flinch now. But even he has to admit the situation is bad. Half his army is already dead or deserted thanks to the depot explosion, and the half that's left is strung thin across a wall that's older than anyone can remember. Hyo's forces press forward in waves, and for every soldier Moon's men cut down, 2 more take his place. The trolls reach the inner gate and start pounding on it with fists the size of engine blocks. The sound echoes through the fortress like a heartbeat from hell. Underground, Do-hyun watches the whole thing through Unit 04's optical feed. The spider perched on a cliff above the valley. Guess what he's doing about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Our boy just leans back in his chair, sips cold water from a canteen Ji-yoon brought him, and lets the slaughter play out on his screen. He doesn't care which lord wins. He doesn't care if either one survives. The fortress is a distraction, and while both armies are busy bleeding each other dry, he's got a window to do something a lot more interesting. Ji-yoon stands behind him and asks what he's smiling about. He taps the schematic of Moon's fortress on his slate and points at a thin line near the bottom of the blueprints, an old sewer passage that drains into the valley's eastern ravine. The passage isn't guarded. It can't be guarded because Moon's own engineers sealed it 50 years ago after a dungeon monster crawled up through it and killed half a barracks. But old seals crack, and Do-hyun has mining drones. He tells Ji-yoon they're going shopping. The battle enters its second day with no winner and no mercy. The valley reeks of smoke and burned flesh long before the sun hits noon. Hyo's trolls finally smash through the inner gate, but Moon's Wyvern is waiting on the other side, and the beast incinerates both trolls in a single screaming pass before collapsing with half its wing clawed off. Hyo himself charges through the breach with a mana-coated greatsword, and the two lords finally meet in the courtyard, steel crashing against steel while the fortress burns around them. It's the fight everyone's been waiting for. Do-hyun doesn't watch a second of it because he's already inside the mountain, guiding a modified Unit 02 through the bedrock toward the sealed sewer passage's lowest point. The drone chews through ancient masonry while Do-hyun crawls behind it in a breather mask. Ji-yoon right on his heels with a compact crossbow and a look that says she still can't believe she agreed to this. We're well below the battle now, the thud of the trolls just a distant rumble through the stone. The drill breaks through, and foul air blasts into the tunnel. 100 years of stagnant sewer stench hits them like a physical wall. Ji-yoon gags into her mask and mutters that she's definitely charging him double for this. Do-hyun ignores her and clambers up into the forgotten passage, his handheld lamp cutting a pale beam through the murk. The walls are slick with black mold and something that might be old blood, but the path is clear. Moon never bothered to guard this route because he thought it was impassable. That's the thing about lords. They always forget that seals break. They forget that rats always find a way in. And our boy is the biggest rat of them all. He moves fast, following the blueprint in his head, until the passage angles upward and opens into a maintenance junction beneath the fortress's eastern keep. Ji-yoon covers his back while he slices through a rusted grate with a plasma cutter built into Unit 02's mining claw. Nobody hears them. Everyone who could hear them is outside dying for 2 egos and a pile of territory. Do-hyun steps out of the sewer and into the underbelly of Moon Seok-jun's most heavily guarded stronghold. He's in. The fortress interior is a maze of stone corridors and torchlit intersections, and normally it would be crawling with guards. Normally. Today there's a skeleton crew at best, and half of those are wounded who can't lift a blade anyway. So Do-hyun and Ji-yoon slip through the lower levels with almost no resistance. The few patrols they encounter are too exhausted to notice 2 shadows moving fast behind their backs. Ji-yoon takes out one guard with a silent crossbow bolt to the neck before he can raise an alarm. Do-hyun's lamp catches the gleam of a heavy iron door set into the far wall of a storage chamber, reinforced, triple locked, with a mana ward glowing faintly across the frame. The treasure vault. He doesn't even need to check the blueprint to know. The ward is old, probably older than Moon himself, and it's keyed to the Lord's personal mana signature. Anybody else touches it, the whole fortress knows. Do-hyun stares at the door for exactly 3 seconds before he tells Unit 02 to cut through the wall beside it. The ward protects the door. It doesn't protect the stone. Big mistake. The mining claw sparks to life and starts carving into the granite with the kind of precision only an automaton can manage. And within 20 minutes there's a crawl space big enough for a grown man to squeeze through on his belly. Ji-yoon whispers that he's insane. He doesn't argue. The vault is smaller than he expected, but packed with exactly the kind of loot you'd expect from a paranoid warlord who's been hoarding for decades. Chests of gold coins stamped with pre-war emblems. Racks of enchanted weapons coated in dust because Moon trusts his sword and nothing else. Scrolls containing territory treaties that have been worthless for 10 years. And in the center of the room, on a pedestal carved from obsidian, sits the thing that Do-hyun didn't even know existed. It's a forge. Not the heavy industrial kind he builds his automatons with, but something older, sleeker, humming with an energy that makes the hair on his arms stand up even through his jacket. The Soul Forge. He reads the name off the inscription on the pedestal's base, and his heart starts pounding as he processes what the inscription is telling him. This device doesn't just shape metal, it binds consciousness. It can take a living mind and fuse it into an automaton core, giving the machine true intelligence, true awareness, true loyalty. Do-hyun's hands are shaking as he runs his fingers over the forge's control surface. This changes everything. This isn't a treasure. This is the key to an empire. Ji-yoon tugs his sleeve and says they've got maybe 5 minutes before someone notices the noise. He snaps out of his trance and gets to work. The soul forge is heavy but not unmovable, about the size of a large backpack, and Do-hyun straps it to his chest without even checking if it's stable. He tells Unit 02 to carry anything else that looks valuable but light, mostly mana crystals and a few schematics that catch his eye. Ji-yoon grabs a pouch of gold because they still need to eat and the guild doesn't accept "I owe us." And then they run. The Wyvern's dying scream splits the air outside like a world ending. The fortress wall gives a terrible groan, and dust pours through the corridor ahead as part of the eastern keep collapses under a direct hit from Hyo's last remaining siege engine. Do-hyun dives through the maintenance junction with Ji-yoon right behind him, and they barely make it into the sewer passage before the ceiling of the vault chamber caves in completely, burying the obsidian pedestal under 10 tons of rubble. Nobody is going to find evidence of the theft now. Moon's fortress is literally falling apart around his ears, and the only thing he's going to know when the battle is over is that his vault got crushed. He won't know what was taken. He won't know who took it. He won't know anything. Do-hyun and Ji-yoon emerge into the ravine 2 hours later, covered in filth and gasping clean air like they've never tasted it before. Unit 02 drags itself out last, its chassis dented from a partial cave-in that nearly trapped it. But the cargo is intact. The soul forge is intact. Our boy sits on a rock and stares at the device in his hands, while the distant sounds of battle finally, slowly, die off into a ragged silence. Hyo Jin-soo's assault has failed. Moon Seok-jun still holds the fortress, barely, with a fraction of his army and a wyvern that's grounded for weeks. Both lords are crippled, and neither one of them has any idea that the real winner of this war just crawled out of their sewer with the most powerful artifact in the way. Territory strapped to his chest. Ji-yoon asks him what the forge does. He tells her. She goes quiet for a long time. Then she says she hopes he knows what he's doing. He doesn't answer. Moon Seok-jun stands in the ruins of his vault 3 days later, and the expression on his face is something his surviving officers have never seen before. Not anger, not grief. Something colder. The wyvern is alive but scarred, its wing membrane shredded, and the healers say it won't fly for a month at minimum. His army is down to maybe 200 able-bodied soldiers. But none of that is what's making his jaw clench, like he's trying to crush his own teeth. The vault is destroyed, yes. The ceiling collapsed, yes. But Moon has been a lord long enough to know the difference between a collapse that buries a treasure and a collapse that hides a theft. The pedestal is broken. The dust patterns are wrong. The tracks in the rubble lead toward the sewer junction. Someone was here. Someone took the soul forge, and Moon knows, with a certainty that settles into his bones like ice water, exactly who did it. The underground rat, the scavenger with the machines, Yoo Do-hyun. Moon turns to his remaining commanders. He doesn't shout. He doesn't rage. He looks at them with the dead calm of a man who has nothing left to lose, and he speaks 4 words. Find him. End him. The hunt is all that's left now. And Moon Seok-jun isn't going to stop until every tunnel under his territory is flooded with fire, and the rat is dragged into the light. He doesn't care about Hyo Jin-soo anymore. He doesn't care about the refugee columns or the protests from the eastern garrison. He doesn't even care about the wyvern's recovery timeline. He wants the automaton builder's head on a pike and the soul forge back in his hands. And he's willing to burn his entire domain to the ground to make that happen. His officers salute and scramble to reorganize what's left of the army. Nobody questions the order. Nobody dares. The fortress is a wreck. The treasury is empty. And the lord they serve has just traded his political ambition for a personal vendetta. That's the kind of thing that makes soldiers very, very nervous. Down in his workshop, Do-hyun sets the soul forge on his main workbench and begins the initial scan. The device powers up with a soft hum, and holographic schematics flicker to life above its surface, rotating slowly in the dim light. Ji-yoon watches from the doorway with her arms crossed. She doesn't say anything, but her expression is clear. She's seen him obsess over tech before, but nothing like this. The forge's interface is intuitive, but the implications are terrifying. To create a truly intelligent automaton, one with independent thought and adaptive learning, the device requires a living consciousness to serve as the bonding template. It doesn't copy, it transfers. The mind goes into the machine. The body is left as an empty husk. Do-hyun stares at the readout and feels something cold settle in his stomach. This isn't just a tool. This is a sacrifice. The unconscious assassin lies on a cot in the corner of the workshop, still breathing, still sedated from the interrogation weeks ago. Do-hyun looks at him. Then he looks at the forge. Then he looks at the blueprints for Unit 05 that he hasn't even started designing yet. He tells Ji-yoon he needs time to think. She nods and leaves him alone with the humming machine and the sleeping killer, and the heavy weight of a decision that will define everything that comes next. Outside, above the stone and the silence, Seok-jun is already preparing his retaliation. Inside, our boy stares at the Soul Forge and wonders exactly how much of his humanity he's willing to trade for safety. The decision doesn't take as long as he thought it would. 3 days of staring at the schematics. 3 days of Ji-yoon bringing him food he doesn't eat. And then he just stands up and walks over to the cot. The assassin's chest is still rising and falling, slow and steady. Our boy looks at the man's face for a long moment. Then he looks at the Soul Forge humming on the workbench. He tells Ji-yoon to leave the room. She opens her mouth to argue and then closes it. Her boots echo down the corridor, and then there's only silence. Do-hyun drags the cot across the stone floor until it's right next to the forge. The interface flickers to life the moment his fingers touch the activation rune. A soft blue light fills the workshop. The forge speaks for the first time. Not in words exactly. More like a question pressed directly into his mind. It wants to know if he's ready to proceed. Do-hyun takes a breath that tastes like metal and stale air. He says yes. Cables extend from the base of the forge like silver vines. They find the assassin's temples, his wrists, the base of his skull. The man's eyes snap open. For about 2 seconds, the assassin is fully awake and fully aware. He sees Do-hyun standing over him. He sees the cables burrowing into his skin. He sees the Soul Forge glowing like a small blue sun. And he screams. The sound doesn't last long. The forge pulls, and the assassin's body goes rigid. His back arches off the cot. His mouth stays open, but nothing comes out anymore. The blue light gets brighter and brighter until Do-hyun has to shield his eyes. When it fades, the assassin is still breathing. But his eyes are empty now. Just glass marbles staring at the ceiling. The forge hums with satisfaction. A new data core materializes in the receptacle slot. It pulses with a soft, amber light. Do-hyun picks it up and his fingers are steady. Our boy doesn't hesitate. He carries the core across the workshop to the fabrication bay. The frame for Unit 05 is already waiting. Humanoid shape, 7 feet tall, reinforced alloy plating. No weapons mounted yet. No sensory array installed. Just a skeleton waiting for a brain. He slots the core into the chest cavity and steps back. For a long moment, nothing happens. Then the amber light spreads through the chassis like blood through veins. The joints flex. The head tilts. Unit 05 sits up on the assembly table and looks at him with eyes that actually focus. It speaks. The voice is mechanical, but there's something underneath it. Not quite human, but not quite machine either. It says Design Designation Unit 05 Online. It says Awaiting Directive. And then it says something Do-hyun didn't program. It asks if he is its creator. Do-hyun stares at the automaton for a long moment. He asks if Unit 05 remembers anything from before. The amber eyes flicker. The machine pauses for exactly 4 seconds. Then it says, No data from prior instance remains. It says it is new. It says it is ready to serve. Do-hyun knows a lie when he hears one. But he also knows a useful tool when he's built one. He tells Unit 05 to stand. The automaton obeys immediately. 7 feet of alloy and servos rises from the table like it weighs nothing. The floor vibrates under its first step. Do-hyun runs diagnostics. Strength output is 40% above projected maximum. Processing speed is nearly double what his best combat unit could manage. And the adaptive learning protocols are already running without his input. Unit 05 isn't just following orders, it's thinking about them. Ji-yoon comes back 3 hours later and nearly puts a knife through the automaton's chest. Do-hyun catches her wrist before she can finish the throw. He tells her it's friendly. She looks at the 7-foot death machine standing motionless in the corner. She looks at the empty cot with the assassin's body still breathing and staring at nothing. She asks Do-hyun what he did. He tells her. She doesn't speak to him for 2 days after that. Unit 05 learns. It watches Do-hyun work, and within 12 hours, it's handing him tools before he asks for them. It studies the blueprints for the underground city and proposes 3 structural improvements he hadn't considered. It asks permission to review the tactical data from Moon's previous assaults. Do-hyun grants access to the archive. The automaton processes the entire battle history in 47 seconds. Then, it speaks. It says the unit designation, Moon Seok-jun, is critically resource depleted. It says the Wyvern is grounded and the army is fractured. It says the optimal strategic window for a decisive counterstrike is now. Do-hyun shakes his head. He says they're not ready for a direct confrontation yet. Unit 05 processes this for exactly 2 seconds. Then, it proposes an alternative, not a counterstrike against Moon's forces. A raid against a high-grade dungeon 3 kilometers east of their position. It pulls up geological scans. Do-hyun didn't even know it had accessed. The dungeon is packed with rare ores, refined crystal deposits, and something the scanners can't identify. Something dense and hot and buried deep. Do-hyun looks at the readings and feels his pulse quicken. That unidentified signature could be anything. Could be a weapon. Could be a power source that makes the stability crystal look like a battery. Could be something that changes the entire balance of power in this territory. Unit 05 waits. Its amber eyes don't blink. Do-hyun asks if it can coordinate the worker drones for an operation this complex. The automaton says affirmative. It says it has already designed the deployment patterns. It says estimated success probability is 92.7%. Our boy looks at the machine he built with stolen tech and a stolen life. He thinks about the assassin's empty eyes staring at the ceiling. He thinks about Moon Seok-jun burning every tunnel looking for him. He thinks about the underground city that's still just blueprints and half-dug caverns. He gives the order. Unit 05 moves. The coordination is beautiful. 4 worker drones form the vanguard, their mining lasers set to combat frequency. 2 combat units, rebuilt from Unit 03's salvaged chassis, bracket the formation. Unit 05 leads from the center, issuing commands through a data link that updates in real time. Do-hyun watches through the camera feeds in his workshop. Ji-yoon stands beside him with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. She's not happy about any of this. He knows that. He also knows she won't leave. The descent into the dungeon takes 40 minutes. The first resistance hits at the 43rd minute. A nest of razor wings, maybe 30 of them, erupting from a side cavern. Unit 05 doesn't even slow down. It calculates trajectories, assigns targets, and the combat units open fire before the first razor swing clears the tunnel mouth. The worker drones adjust formation automatically. Not a single piece of hardware takes damage. The nest is cleared in under 2 minutes. Ji-yoon mutters something under her breath. Do-hyun doesn't catch the words, but he catches the tone. It's not admiration. The party reaches the first ore vein 30 minutes after that. The harvest begins. Worker drones deploy extraction beams that shear through rock like butter. Raw crystal pours into collection bins in chunks the size of a man's head. The combat units sweep the perimeter in overlapping arcs. Unit 05 stands at the center of it all, like a conductor leading an orchestra. And then the scanners detect movement deeper in the shaft. Something big. Unit 05 relays the data back to the workshop. Do-hyun watches the readout with his heart hammering against his ribs. The signature matches the unidentified density reading from the geological scan. It's not a mineral deposit. It's not a crystal vein. It's alive. The tunnel wall shatters inward. The creature that emerges is a nightmare of chitin and claws. 12 feet tall, 6 limbs, mandibles that drip acid onto the stone floor. The combat units open fire immediately. Their laser bolts splash against the monster's carapace and leave scorch marks, but nothing more. The worker drones scramble backward with their collection bins still attached. Unit 05 steps forward. It tells Do-hyun it is engaging. The automaton moves like it was born for this. It closes the gap in under a second. One alloy fist drives into the creature's mandible joint, and the crack echoes through the tunnel. Acid sprays across Unit 05's chest and sizzles against the plating. The automaton doesn't react. It just hits the thing again and again. The monster's claw catches Unit 05 across the shoulder and tears a gash through the outer armor layer. Sparks fly from the exposed wiring. Unit 05 grabs the claw with both hands and twists. The joint snaps with a sound like a tree branch breaking. The creature roars. Unit 5 drives its other fist straight down the monster's throat and fires an internal shock pulse. The beast convulses once and goes still. Unit 05 withdraws its arm from the corpse and returns to formation. It reports the threat is neutralized. It requests permission to continue the harvest. Do-hyun stares at the screen. The combat units are untouched. The worker drones still have their cargo. The only damage is a gash on Unit 05's shoulder that the automaton already seems to have forgotten about. He says, "Permission granted." The harvest resumes. By the end of the operation, the drones have extracted enough crystal to power the entire base for 6 months. The ore bins overflow with metals. Do-hyun hasn't been able to salvage in weeks. Load after load comes up the tunnel shaft. Ji-yoon stops pretending she's not impressed around the 4th trip. She asks if this is going to be a regular thing now. Do-hyun says it has to be. The underground city needs resources, and the surface routes are too dangerous. He tells her that Unit 05 has already flagged 3 more dungeons within striking distance. He says they can be fully self-sufficient within a month. Ji-yoon looks at him for a long moment. She asks if he's sure about the automaton, if he's really sure about what he put inside it. Do-hyun doesn't answer, because he's not sure. He's not sure about any of it anymore. But the resources are real. The expansion is real. The underground city is starting to look less like a blueprint and more like a home. He tells himself that's what matters. Up on the surface, the ground trembles again. Moon Seok-jun's observers feel it from their patrol camps 3 kilometers east of the ravine. They report the anomaly immediately. Moon reads the report with eyes that haven't slept in 4 days. He knows those tremors. He's felt them before when dungeons collapse after a high-grade extraction. Somebody is mining deep. Somebody is getting stronger while he sits in his wrecked fortress, waiting for a wyvern that can't fly. His spies intercept a supply caravan leaving the neutral outpost and heading toward the ravine. The merchants won't say who they're trading with. Moon doesn't need them to. He knows exactly where those supplies are going. He knows exactly who's paying for them. The underground rat isn't just hiding anymore. The rat is building something. The wyvern stirs in its pen. Its wing membrane is still shredded, but something else is happening now. A fevery glow pulses under its scales. The healers don't understand it, but they're afraid of it. One of them says the beast is feeding on something, says it's pulling energy from somewhere they can't detect. Moon watches the wyvern and feels the cold certainty settle back into his chest. He doesn't need to find the rat anymore. He just needs to wait. Because whatever is pulsing under that wyvern's scales is hungry. And when it's ready, it will lead him straight to the door. The wyvern is locked onto him like a predator that has scented weakness in the herd. Its molten breath carves a trench through the outer blast doors, and the steel runs like candle wax. Do-hyun watches the temperature readings spike into the red from his command station. Unit 05 is already standing in the breach before Do-hyun can give an order. The automaton's voice crackles through the speaker, and it tells him the defensive line won't hold. It says the wyvern will breach the main cavern in under 3 minutes at current melt rate. Do-hyun asks what it's proposing. Unit 05 says it has calculated the only viable path, and it is requesting authorization for a total loss engagement. The words hit Do-hyun harder than he expects them to. Unit 05 is his greatest creation, and it is asking permission to die. Ji-yoon is standing behind him, and she doesn't say a word. The temperature alarms are screaming now, and the ceiling is starting to drip molten rock. Do-hyun says, authorization granted. Unit 05 doesn't hesitate. It turns and sprints toward the wyvern, with its damaged shoulder still sparking. The automaton fires every weapon system it has, and the laser bolts pepper the wyvern's hide like angry hornets. The beast barely notices. It swings its head, and a glob of superheated phlegm catches Unit 05 across the torso. The automaton's outer plating warps and buckles, but it keeps moving. Unit 05 doesn't stop, and it doesn't slow down. It dashes past the wyvern and heads straight for the eastern tunnel network. The wyvern roars, and the sound is a physical pressure that rattles the command station monitors. It follows Unit 05 because it can't help itself, and because the automaton is broadcasting an energy signature designed to look like a fleeing command. Core. Do-hyun switches his camera feed to follow the chase. Unit 05 is running through tunnels that haven't been fully mapped yet. The automaton is leading the wyvern away from the residential cavern and away from the fabrication forge. It is buying time with every step and every meter of scorched tunnel floor. Ji-yoon quietly says the automaton really means to do it. Do-hyun doesn't answer. He's watching Unit 05 reach the cavern he marked 3 days ago as a geological hazard. The cavern is a natural formation filled with unstable crystals that Do-hyun deemed too volatile to harvest. The crystals hum with a frequency that shatters glass 3 tunnels away. Unit 05 stops in the exact center of the crystal forest. It turns to face the wyvern as the beast crashes through the cavern mouth, and the crystals start vibrating from the noise alone. The wyvern draws breath for a killing blast. Unit 05 raises one arm and deploys a pulse emitter that Do-hyun didn't know it had installed. The automaton says something over the comm, but the crystal interference garbles the words. Then it fires the pulse, and the cavern becomes a star for exactly 1 second. The crystals detonate in a chain reaction that propagates faster than human thought. White light floods every camera, and the shockwave travels through the bedrock like a thunderclap, rolling through solid ground. Do-hyun's monitors go black, and the whole base heaves sideways. He grabs the console to keep from falling, The sound reaches them a heartbeat later, and it is the sound of a mountain cracking in half. When the static clears, Do-hyun sees that the eastern tunnel network is gone. The ceiling has collapsed across 12 different sections, and the debris field extends half a kilometer in every direction. The Wyvern signature is gone, and Unit 05's transponder is offline. The silence in the command station is heavier than the mountain overhead. Ji-yoon whispers that it worked. Do-hyun nods once, and his jaw is tight enough to crack teeth. He doesn't have time to mourn, and he knows it. The explosion didn't just kill the Wyvern, and it didn't just bury Unit 05 under 1,000,000 tons of rock. The seismic shockwave punched upward through the weakest points in the crust, and those weak points are the main entrance tunnels. The overhead camouflage collapses like a sinkhole opening in fast forward. Daylight pours into the underground for the first time since Do-hyun found this place. And in that daylight, Moon Seok-jun's forces are already moving. Of course they are. Moon had his troops staged in a loose perimeter 3 kilometers out, and the seismic spike was exactly the signal they were waiting for. Do-hyun watches the camera feeds come back online, one by one, and each reactivated screen shows the same nightmare. Soldiers are pouring into the revealed breach in a dark tide of standardized armor and drawn steel. Moon Seok-jun is at the front, and he is not riding a horse or directing from a command tent. He is walking into the tunnel mouth on foot, with a blade in each hand, and his face is completely blank. The man looks like someone who has stopped being angry and started being methodical. Do-hyun pulls up his remaining assets, and the numbers are not good. 2 combat drones survived the cave-in. 4 worker units are still operational, but they are not designed for combat. Unit 04 is on the surface and too far to recall before the breach point is overrun. The fabrication forge is intact, but it takes time to build new units, and time is the one resource Do-hyun doesn't have right now. Ji-yoon is already pulling her gear together, and she says she'll slow them down at the first choke point. Do-hyun tells her no, and means it. He says she'll die if she tries to hold that corridor alone. Ji-yoon looks at him and asks what the alternative is. Do-hyun walks to the fabrication forge and starts pulling up blueprints he never wanted to use. The design is incomplete, and the power draw will probably kill him, but it's the only frame that can turn this fight around in time. It's a heavy combat chassis based on the Unit 03 Scorpion model, but scaled up by 300%. 6 legs and a reinforced alloy carapace and twin-linked pulse cannons mounted on a swivel turret. The problem is the control interface, because the mental load of piloting something that big will fry a human nervous system in under 2 minutes. Do-hyun looks at the soul forge in the corner of the workshop, and the cold thing in his chest tightens another notch. He doesn't have another assassin to sacrifice, and even if he did, there is no time for the binding ritual. The forge needs a living consciousness, and the only consciousness available is his own. Ji-yoon realizes what he's planning about half a second before he says it out loud. She tells him absolutely not, and her voice cracks on the second word. Do-hyun is already modifying the command protocols, and he says there is no other way. Moon's soldiers are in the tunnels, and they will reach the main cavern in 12 minutes. He can't pilot the heavy frame remotely. He can't build enough small units to hold the breach. He can either upload himself into the chassis and fight, or he can sit here and die when Moon kicks down the door. Ji-yoon grabs his arm, and her grip is strong enough to hurt. She says the forge was never meant for a live transfer, and she says he doesn't know if he'll come back out. Do-hyun gently removes her hand and says he'll just have to make sure he does. He tells her to get to the life support pod they salvaged from the medical bay. If the upload works, he'll need someone to keep his body alive while his mind is in the frame. Ji-yoon is crying now, but she's already moving toward the medical bay because she knows arguing is a waste of breath. Do-hyun climbs into the Soul Forge's interface chair, and the restraints lock around his wrists and ankles. The forge hums to life, and the activation sequence scrolls down his vision in lines of cold blue text. His head fills with static, and the taste of copper floods his mouth. The chassis looms over him on the fabrication pad, and its empty optics stare down like the eye sockets of a metal skull. Do-hyun thinks about his family, and the dungeon collapse, and the years of scraping through ruins as a scavenger. He thinks about Unit 01 and Unit 02 and Unit 05 sacrificing itself in a crystal cavern with a pulse emitter in its hand. Then he stops thinking because the Soul Forge engages, and his mind is ripped out of his skull like a plug being yanked from a socket. The pain is beyond anything he has ever felt. It's not fire, and it's not cold, and it's not pressure. It's the sensation of being unmade and remade, and finding that both versions of yourself are screaming. His consciousness slams into the heavy chassis, and the interface is a jagged mess of incompatible protocols and raw sensory feed. The world resolves into 6 visual channels and a tactical overlay that paints every surface in threat assessment colors. Moon soldiers are 3 minutes from the main cavern, and the breach point is a river of moving heat signatures. Do-hyun tries to move, and the legs respond with a half-second delay that makes him stagger. He catches himself on the cavern wall, and his claws gouge furrows in the stone like it's wet clay. The twin pulse cannons spool up with a rising whine that makes every soldier in the tunnel stop running. In the medical bay, Ji-yoon slides Do-hyun's limp body into the life support pod, and her hands are shaking. The pod seals with a hiss, and the vital sign monitors flicker to life. His heart is still beating. His brain activity is flat, and that is either a good sign or a very bad one. Ji-yoon doesn't let herself think about which one it might be. She grabs her bow and moves to defend the pod, because there are still 10 minutes before Moon's forces reach the medical bay, and every second counts. Do-hyun tests his new body in the main cavern, and the power output reads at 87% of maximum. The integration is unstable, and the numbers are flickering orange at the edges of his awareness. He doesn't care. He has 6 legs and twin cannons, and a grudge the size of the mountain he buried his best unit under. Seok-jun's vanguard rounds the corner, and they see the chassis waiting for them in the dark. The lead soldier's mouth opens to shout a warning, but he never gets the chance. Do-hyun fires both cannons, and the tunnel becomes a corridor of light. The twin pulse cannons fire, and the vanguard ceases to exist. 6 legs slam forward, and Do-hyun charges through the dust. Moon's soldiers scatter, but the tunnels are too narrow, and there's nowhere to run. Do-hyun's new body moves like a freight train made of blades and bad intentions. He catches one soldier with a claw and hurls him into 3 others. The tactical overlay paints everything in threat assessment orange, and the numbers keep climbing. His integration is at 92% and flickering, but it's more than enough. A spearman tries to flank him, and Do-hyun's swivel turret tracks the movement automatically. 1 pulse round, and the spearman's shield evaporates, along with most of his torso. Ji-yoon's voice crackles through the comm unit in his chassis, and she says the medical bay is secure. Her breathing is ragged, and he can hear her bowstring drawing back in the background. 2 soldiers made it past the main cavern, and she dropped them both before they reached the pod. Do-hyun tells her to hold position, and then he turns his attention back to the tunnel. The main invasion force is 40 men, and they're all crammed into a corridor that wasn't built for a fighting retreat. He catches them mid-collapse with nowhere to go. His cannons cycle through a cooling sequence, and the whine drops to a low hum. 3 seconds later, they're back online, and he fires again. The tunnel becomes a butcher shop, and Do-hyun doesn't slow down. A heavily armored knight steps forward with a tower shield enchanted to repel magical attacks. The shield holds against the first pulse round, and the knight grins through his visor. Big mistake. Do-hyun closes the distance in 2 strides and brings a claw down on the shield's edge. The enchanted steel crumples like tin foil, and the knight's arm breaks in 3 places. He doesn't even get to scream before Do-hyun swats him into the wall. The remaining soldiers break formation and run. Do-hyun lets them go because his sensors just picked up a bigger heat signature approaching from the east tunnel. 1 heat signature, and it's massive, and it's moving fast. The ceiling cracks, and Seok-jun drops through the stone like a meteor. He's wearing a full suit of blackened war plate, etched with dungeon rune circuitry. His gauntlets are crackling with red lightning, and his helmet's visor glows like a furnace. He lands 10 meters from Do-hyun, and the impact shatters the floor in a 20-foot radius. The 2 of them stand there in the ruined cavern, with smoke curling around their feet. Moon's voice comes out of the helmet as a metallic growl, and he says he's been waiting for this. He says he knew the underground rat would eventually crawl out of his hole. Do-hyun doesn't bother with a reply, because his cannons are already spooling up. He fires, and Moon crosses his gauntlets in front of his chest. The pulse rounds hit the red lightning and scatter into a web of dying sparks. Moon laughs and says he had his armor reforged specifically to counter energy weapons. Then he moves, and he's faster than anything that size has a right to be. He closes the gap in half a heartbeat and drives a fist into Do-hyun's chassis. The impact knocks Do-hyun back 3 steps, and his structural integrity drops to 78%. Moon presses the advantage, and the red lightning lashes out like whips. Each strike leaves a molten gash in the armor plating, and Do-hyun's threat assessment starts screaming warnings. He tanks the hits and waits for an opening. Moon throws a haymaker, and Do-hyun ducks under it and drives all 6 claws into Moon's chestplate. The dungeon runes flare white-hot, trying to repel the strike, but Do-hyun just pushes harder. His integration spikes to 97%, and the claws punch through. Moon staggers back with 4 puncture wounds smoking in his warplate. He's not laughing anymore. Do-hyun presses forward, and now he's the one throwing the haymaker. His claw catches Moon's helmet and rips half of it clean off. Moon's face underneath is scarred and furious, and there's blood running from his scalp. He spits a wad of red onto the floor and says the rat has teeth after all. Then he reaches for his belt and activates something strapped to his hip. A containment module pops open, and black smoke pours out and coils around his arm like a living thing. The smoke solidifies into a blade made of compressed dungeon corruption, and the air around it screams. Moon swings, and Do-hyun's left foreleg comes off at the joint. The amputation is so clean, the servos don't even register the damage for a full second. Do-hyun stumbles, and Moon kicks him in the chassis hard enough to send him crashing into the fabrication pad. His cannons are offline, and his structural integrity is down to 41%. Ji-yoon is screaming something through the comm, but he can't hear her over the alarms. Moon advances with the corruption blade humming in his grip. He says Do-hyun's technology belongs to him now, and he'll start by ripping the chassis apart piece by piece. He raises the blade for a finishing strike, and Do-hyun does the only thing left. He dumps every remaining erg of power into his pulse cannons and fires point blank into the ceiling. The cavern roof collapses, and 1,000 tons of rock come down between them. Moon leaps backward to avoid being crushed, and the falling stone buys Do-hyun a window of about 8 seconds. He drags himself upright on 5 legs, and his processors are screaming for a reboot. The tactical overlay is flickering, and his visual feeds are down to 3 channels. He can see Moon through the dust cloud digging himself out of the rubble with a corruption blade flashing. Ji-yoon's voice cuts through the static, and she says the life support pod just flatlined. She says his body in the medical bay went into cardiac arrest, and she's running to the crash cart. Do-hyun feels something cold crawl up his machine spine, and he knows the integration is failing. The Soul Forge was never designed for a full consciousness upload, and his original body is rejecting the separation. He has maybe 90 seconds before the link snaps, and his mind gets trapped in a dying chassis. Moon bursts through the rockfall, and the corruption blade is blazing with hungry light. Do-hyun makes a choice, and he reaches for the stability crystal embedded in his chassis core. He crushes it in his claw, and the raw energy floods his systems like a tidal wave. The integration surges to 100%, and then past it, and the numbers stop mattering. His chassis starts to glow from the inside, and every seam is leaking blue-white light. Moon sees what's happening, and he actually takes a step back. Do-hyun doesn't explode, and he doesn't burn out. The crystal energy finds the Soul Forge's connection and stabilizes it and locks the link in place. His consciousness doesn't snap back to his human body, and it doesn't shatter inside the chassis. It anchors itself in both at the same time. In the medical bay, the life support pod's monitors spike back to life, and Do-hyun's heart starts beating again. Ji-yoon is standing over him with the defibrillator paddles, and she nearly drops them. His eyes are still closed, but his lips move, and he says her name through the comm unit. 2 bodies and 1 mind, and the feedback loop is terrifyingly clean. The chassis rises on 5 legs, and the missing foreleg is already regrowing itself from the raw crystal energy. Moon stares at the reforming limb, and his jaw tightens. The corruption blade wavers in his grip because he's looking at something he doesn't understand. Do-hyun's human body sits up in the medical bay, and Ji-yoon stumbles backward. His eyes open, and they're glowing the same blue-white as the chassis core. He can see through both sets of eyes simultaneously, and the dual perception should be maddening. But it isn't. It's just 2 windows into the same room of his mind. Moon snarls and charges with the corruption blade raised high. Do-hyun's chassis sidesteps the strike, and his human body stands up from the pod with Ji-yoon shouting at him to lie back down. He doesn't lie back down. He walks out of the medical bay on bare feet, with the glow still burning in his pupils. Ji-yoon follows him with her bow drawn, and she's asking what the hell just happened. Do-hyun tells her the Soul Forge finally finished its work. The chassis catches Moon's blade on a reformed claw, and the corruption screams against the crystal light. Moon is pushing with everything he has, and Do-hyun's chassis doesn't move an inch. His human body walks into the ruined cavern and stands behind the chassis like a ghost. Moon sees him, and his eyes go wide. He says that's impossible, and he says no one can split their consciousness between 2 vessels. Do-hyun speaks through both mouths at once, and the sound is eerie and doubled. He says Moon was wrong about a lot of things. The chassis grabs Moon's corrupted arm and squeezes. The dungeon rune armor cracks, and the red lightning gutters and dies. Moon tries to pull free, and Do-hyun's chassis just squeezes harder. The corruption blade shatters, and Moon screams. He drops to his knees with his arm pinned in a grip that's crumpling his gauntlet like paper. His helmet is gone, and his face is twisted with pain and rage, and something that looks a lot like fear. Do-hyun's human body walks forward, and he stops a few feet from Moon's kneeling form. He doesn't look triumphant, and he doesn't look angry. He just looks tired. He tells Moon the fight is over, and he tells him to yield. Moon's lips peel back from his teeth, and he laughs. It's a broken, wheezing laugh, and blood is running from his mouth. He says Do-hyun thinks he's won, but he doesn't understand what's coming. He says he already sent the message, and his hand is still clutching the containment module on his belt. The module is open, and it's empty because the corruption blade was never the only thing inside. A tiny transmission beacon with a needle-thin antenna is blinking with a steady green light. Moon says a global organization called the ARC has been looking for technology exactly like Do-hyun's. He says they've been monitoring territory lords for years, waiting for someone to crack the old world systems, and he just told them where to find the jackpot. Do-hyun's chassis registers the transmission frequency and traces it to a satellite relay somewhere beyond the continent. The signal is already gone, and it's too late to intercept. Moon slumps forward, and his arm finally breaks inside what's left of his gauntlet. He's still laughing when he passes out from the pain. Ji-yoon lowers her bow, and her face is pale. She asks what the ARC is, and Do-hyun doesn't have an answer. His chassis releases Moon's unconscious body, and his human form stares at the blinking beacon. The glow in his eyes fades to a dim flicker, and he tells Ji-yoon they need to prepare. Whatever Moon just summoned is bigger than territory lords and dungeon wars and everything they've survived so far. He reaches out with both hands, and the chassis mirrors the gesture. Man and machine stand side by side in the wreckage of the cavern. The battle is over, and Moon Seok-jun is defeated, and Do-hyun has won everything he set out to win. But the victory tastes like ash, because somewhere beyond the horizon, something just woke up, and it's already looking his way. The surface air hits Do-hyun's human face for the first time in months. It stinks of ash and old blood, and the sour, sweet rot of a battlefield that's been cooking under the sun. He doesn't flinch. His chassis walks beside him, and the five-legged gate is silent on the scorched stone. Ji-yoon follows 3 paces behind, with her bow still strung and her eyes scanning every shadow. She's not convinced the fight is over, and honestly neither is he. But the soldiers they pass don't raise their weapons. They're kneeling. Dozens of Moon's surviving troops are lined up along the crater ridge with their blades flat on the ground, and their heads bowed. Word travels fast when a territory lord gets his arm crushed and his wyvern blown to chunks inside a mountain. The garrison commander is a grizzled woman with a burn scar across her scalp, and she steps forward first. She asks if Moon Seok-jun is dead. Do-hyun's chassis speaks, and his human mouth stays still. He says Moon is alive and imprisoned, and that's worse than dead for a man like him. The commander looks at the machine, and then at the man, and she doesn't ask which one she's supposed to address. She just drops to one knee and presses her forehead to the dirt. The rest of the garrison follows like a wave. Do-hyun stands in the middle of it, and the sun is setting behind him, and his shadow stretches long and doubled across the broken ground. Ji-yoon mutters that this is insane, and she's not wrong. He was a scavenger 3 months ago, and now he's accepting the surrender of an army. The chassis raises one claw, and the gesture is simple and commanding. He tells them to stand. He tells them the war with Moon is over, and his territory now belongs to him by right of conquest. Anyone who wants to leave can leave, and anyone who stays follows his law. Nobody moves toward the road. The commander asks what his law is, and Do-hyun says the same thing he's been building underground since day one. No tribute runs to distant lords, and no press-ganging civilians into dungeon raids, and no burning farms because a noble got bored. Resources go to building and protecting and feeding people. It sounds simple because it is. The soldiers look at each other, and a few of them actually laugh, but it's the kind of laugh people make when they've been waiting years to hear. Something that isn't insane. By nightfall, the garrison is clearing rubble and hauling supply crates under the chassis' supervision. Ji-yoon finds Do-hyun's human body sitting on a collapsed wall with a datapad in his hands. She asks if he's planning to sleep anytime this century. He doesn't look up, and he says sleep is a luxury for people with one brain to maintain. She sits down next to him, and she doesn't say anything for a while. Then she tells him the scout network is already buzzing, and 3 neighboring lords have sent feelers asking who the hell just took Moon's territory. Do-hyun says, let them ask, and he keeps typing. His datapad shows a schematic that makes Ji-yoon's eyes go wide. It's not a bunker, and it's not a hideout, and it's not a panic room. It's a factory complex with 12 assembly bays and a central smelter, and a rail line that runs 2 kilometers to the nearest quarry. She asks where he's planning to put that, and he points up, above ground and in plain sight, and built directly on top of Moon's old fortress foundation. Ji-yoon tells him that's the most arrogant thing she's ever heard, and Do-hyun finally looks at her. He says hiding almost got him killed, and almost got her killed, and it definitely got Unit 01 and Unit 02 and Unit 05 killed. No more hiding, and the glow in his pupils flares just slightly when he says it. Construction starts at dawn. Do-hyun deploys every surviving worker drone, and he retasks the garrison's engineers, and he redirects the energy from the stability crystal into a new fabrication array. The chassis hauls steel beams, while his human body supervises the assembly line calibrations. Watching both bodies work in perfect sync makes the soldiers deeply uncomfortable, and they try not to stare, and they fail completely. Ji-yoon starts calling him the Ghost Lord, and the nickname sticks within about 6 hours. By the end of the first week, the factory's main skeleton is up. The assembly bays are massive, hangar-like structures with reinforced concrete walls salvaged from Moon's own fortress. The central smelter burns hot enough to melt dungeon-grade ore, and it runs on crystal energy, so there's no smoke and no fuel cost. Worker drones multiply fast once the first production line goes active. Each new drone builds 2 more, and those build 4 more. And within 10 days, Do-hyun has a swarm of over 200 basic units. The garrison watches the automaton workforce grow, and the commander pulls Ji-yoon aside and asks if their new lord is even human anymore. Ji-yoon tells her he's the most human person she's ever met, and she doesn't know if that's a compliment or a warning. Do-hyun hears the question through a drone's audio sensor, and he files it away without answering. He's been asking himself the same thing since the Soul Forge finished its work. His human body still needs food and sleep, and his heart still beats, and his lungs still fill with air. But when he's in the chassis, his thoughts run faster and cleaner, and the world resolves into data streams and threat assessments and optimal pathing. He doesn't dream anymore. He doesn't know if that bothers him. The factory complex expands faster than anyone thought possible, and by the 3rd week, it's a small industrial city. Smelting towers and assembly hangars, and a power distribution grid that feeds energy to every corner of the territory. The rail line reaches the quarry, and mining drones start hauling raw ore by the ton. Do-hyun stands on the factory's highest observation platform, and he looks out over what he's built. Ji-yoon climbs up to join him, and she's holding a portable comm unit with an encrypted channel open. Her face is tight, and she doesn't waste time with small talk. She says one of her contacts in the Eastern Relay Station intercepted a burst transmission 2 hours ago. The encryption on it is way beyond anything the territory lords use, and the signal origin point is somewhere over the ocean. Do-hyun's chassis processes the data, while his human body takes the comm unit from her hands. He reads the intercepted message, and his expression doesn't change. The message is addressed to a group called the Ark, and it's a status update. Extraction fleet en route and target designation is his territory coordinates down to the meter, and estimated resistance is listed as unknown. Ji-yoon asks who these people are, and Do-hyun says Moon's parting gift just got a delivery confirmation. He pulls up everything the facility's old databanks have on the Ark, and it's not much. Fragments and references, and one corrupted file that mentions a global shadow government that predates the dungeon apocalypse. The file speculates they were responsible for the first breaches, and the first monster waves, and the collapse of the old world nations. Do-hyun reads it 3 times, and the chassis' claws clench hard enough to score the steel railing. Ji-yoon asks if the file is reliable, and Do-hyun says it doesn't matter. What matters is they're coming, and they have a fleet, and they want his technology. He turns away from the railing, and his human eyes and his chassis optics glow in perfect sync. He tells Ji-yoon to activate every scout in her network and put them on full alert. He tells the factory control system to shift every production line to combat frames. The worker drones stop hauling ore and start welding armor plating and mounting crystal cannons on heavy chassis units. Assembly Bay 4 retools for interceptor drones, and Bay 6 starts printing mobile shield generators. And by nightfall, the factory is a war machine. Ji-yoon watches the transformation, and she asks what the endgame is here. Do-hyun says the endgame is the same thing it's always been. He didn't build a hidden city just to hand it over to some shadow government that thinks it owns the world. He built it so people could live free, and that's still the goal. The goal just got bigger. The Scout Network reports in 12 hours later, and the news is exactly what Do-hyun expected, and worse. A formation of airships is crossing the Eastern Ocean, and they're massive and armored and bristling with weapons. The lead ship has a hull that's easily 3 times the size of Moon's entire fortress. Ji-yoon's contact describes it as a flying city, and she's not exaggerating by much. The fleet is escorting a central vessel that's so large it's generating its own weather disturbance, and the clouds around it are twisting into a slow spiral. Do-hyun watches the feed through a relay drone he's positioned on the coast. His chassis stands motionless in the command center, and his human body is in the medical bay running a final diagnostic on the integration link. The link is stable, and the dual-body sync is at 98% efficiency, and his combat readiness is green across the board. He's as ready as he's ever going to be. The fleet crosses the coastline at dawn, and the shadow of the lead ship falls across the territory like an eclipse. Civilians are already underground because Ji-yoon organized an evacuation to the old bunker network the moment the scouts confirmed the heading. The garrison is deployed in defensive positions around the factory complex, with their weapons trained on the sky. Do-hyun's interceptor drones are hidden in silos, and his heavy combat frames are crouched behind shield walls. Everyone is waiting, and the silence is worse than any battle noise he's ever heard. Then the comm channel crackles, and a voice comes through. It's calm and precise, and completely devoid of emotion or accent or anything that sounds human. The voice identifies itself as the Overseer, and it says it's speaking on behalf of the Ark. It says Do-hyun's technology has been designated a Class 1 anomaly, and by the authority of the Global Restoration Mandate, he is ordered to surrender all automaton schematics and the Soul Forge and himself. The voice says compliance will result in a comfortable and indefinite detainment, and non-compliance will result in the territory's complete erasure. The transmission ends with a set of coordinates for a landing zone outside the factory gates. Ji-yoon is standing next to Do-hyun's human body, and she's gone very pale. She asks what he's going to do. Do-hyun doesn't answer with words. He reaches out through the network, and he touches every single combat frame, and every interceptor drone, and every defense turret he's built. The factory's power core ramps up to maximum output, and the crystal energy surges through the grid like a pulse. His chassis steps forward, and his human body walks to the command console. Both mouths speak at once, and the sound carries across every comm channel in the territory. He says they're not surrendering anything, and they're not hiding, and if the Ark wants a fight, then the Ark is going to get one. The interceptor silos snap open, and 200 drones launch in a screaming wave. The shield walls hum to full power, and the heavy frames lock their targeting systems onto the lead airship. The sky fills with metal and light, and the rising whine of crystal cannons charging. Do-hyun's human eyes flare from blue-white to deep crimson, and he raises one hand toward the fleet. He says the words that end the chapter and start the war. Let them come. The Overseer's transmission clicks back on, and the voice says something it hasn't said in 400 years. It says the Restoration Mandate acknowledges the refusal, and then it says the fleet is authorized to engage. The first salvo drops from the lead airship, and the sky catches fire.